Standing in front of the first door of the first world he ever entered, Ed stares longingly, thinking about the faces of his previous comrades. Even though a decade has passed, he can still remember their faces as if they were yesterday. So with the key in hand, he decided to put it in, expecting a peaceful world awaiting him on the other side of the door. But before we get to that, let's see where our current hero is at, and right now, things aren't looking good for him. With the grim look on his face, his party member tells him that there's no need to come in tomorrow. Right now, all four of them were sporting long faces. But Ed remained nonchalant and just repeated what the former told him a second ago. Our hero tries to play it cool, asking if they want him to take a day off tomorrow. But Goatee Dude kind of lost it at that, so he said it as it is. Ed's no longer needed. That's why he doesn't need to come, raising his voice while he's at it. Ed thinks that maybe he's had too much to drink, which is why this time, Goatee Dude looks at him straight in the eyes as he tells Ed that the majority of them have all agreed to this. It's not a sudden decision. Okay, now the gravity of the situation is starting to hit our boy. He looks at them frantically from left to right, asking if this is what they've really come to. Like, come on, they made a pact to defeat the Demon King, right? Ed tries to appeal to their leader, Hiro-sama, asking if it's a joke, but the long-haired man says that they're serious. He went on to acknowledge that Ed's a talented person, which is why he invited our boy to join the party in the first place. Hiro-sama also quick to admit that in the short time they spent together, Ed already taught and helped him with a lot of things. But here comes the deal breaker. How is Ed acting recently though? Our boy started to take the easy way out with the tasks given to him, and he's even indulged himself more in self-training, much to everyone's dismay. Hiro-sama points out that compared to the rest of the group, who were training to harness their skills for the upcoming battle, Ed is, well, still Ed. He's the same as when he first joined. Still, the long-haired Bishonen of a Hiro-sama held on to hope, thinking that Ed would come too and start to get motivated by those around him. But enough was enough. Hearing all this, Ed could only hang his head in shame as Hiro-sama delivered the finishing blow. He was banished from the hero's party. There was a moment of silence before a voice sounded in Ed's mind. Condition met. 10 minutes remaining until return, says the voice, with their boy breaking out into a huge grin. Suddenly, he raises his hand in the air and lets out the loudest "Hell yeah!" Much to everyone's surprise, what the heck's wrong with this dude? The mage asks if he finally lost it, but Ed assures them that he's fine, claiming that his wish finally came true. He turns to them with a smile, asking if they would like to receive this, and by doing so, he opens a portal out of thin air. Okay, now that's enough to rattle them in their seats, as Ed pulls out several instruction manuals for each of his party members. But more important than that, their mage is all over him, asking that he has a dimensional storage skill all this time. But of course, Ed had to downplay it. The mage still couldn't believe it, her eyes getting glossy as she told him that they could make do with that skill in many ways. But nope, our boy pushed the manual in front of her and urged the mage and the others to read it instead. One by one, they picked it up as Ed explained that he put together a list of efficient training methods tailored for them, aside from ways to acquire new skills based on the information he got from the battles he's been through. Ed smiles and genuinely tells them that he hopes they can use it as a reference for the kind of growth they have in mind in the future. That's when one of them, a short-haired girl who's probably their healer, raises her hand and asks about a certain type of magic she was supposed to learn, though she has no idea of it. Ed looks over her shoulder to see and explains that it's something she'll learn better as she grows older, and he adds that he put together details on how to do so, which she can read through later. She thanks him in a small voice, and that's when the goatee dude from before starts bombarding him with a lot of questions. Like, what the heck was up with the perfectly drawn map Ed handed him? It's got a detailed plan and layout of hidden passages and traps that he didn't even notice before. Like before, Ed calmly explains that it's pretty handy, and that it's just a map of the places they've been to. But goatee dude couldn't believe it. There's just no way Ed could draw a map to a place he's never been to. In answer to that, Ed just tells him that it's a secret. And besides, he's no longer a party member anymore, so he doesn't owe him that. Finally, it was Hiro-sama who called out to Ed before giving a full-on 90-degree bow as he just said he was sorry. Now that was something Ed didn't expect, but the former continued to hang his head low, asking for forgiveness as he had no idea Ed was doing all this work without his knowledge. Following their leader's initiative, their healer, or at least I think she is, also bows her head in apology for trying to get rid of him without knowing his efforts. Ed starts to panic, refusing to be revered like that. Even goatee dude had to admit that Ed was doing a much better job than him. How pathetic. And he's even the one who had the guts to scold Ed, which is why he issued an apology too, and says that our hero was right. All their apologies got Ed frantic as he urged them to raise their heads. He's just doing all these as a token of gratitude for how well they treated him all this time, apart from how he just wants to be useful to them long after he's gone. Finally, it was their big-racked mage who told him that they were taking back their decision, as she questioned if there was any of them who objected to the decision. This time, Hiro-sama turns to Ed in a new light, and is about to ask the $1,000,000 question. But before he can say it out loud, Ed shuts them down in one go. Eh? Well, Hiro-sama hangs his head, thinking it's not that easy to banish someone, and asks him to come back in the same breath. But Ed assures him that it's not like that. Turning to the door, he looks back and tells them with a smile that he just looks forward to seeing them all defeat the Demon King as he runs out the door. Even though they called out to him, Ed was already sprinting to the local town outside. The same voice from before sounded in his head, saying he had only 10 seconds until his return, making him all giddy with excitement as he ran past the townsfolk. He jumps from rooftop to rooftop to reach the bell tower, barely making it in the last 3-second countdown. He checks the place and deems that it's the most ideal one, just as the voice tells him that it's executing world transmigration and enveloping our hero in a ray of light. In just a flash, Ed is absorbed into the light, and no sooner had he done so than he instantly stepped into a puddle of clear water. Finally, the world transmigration is complete, just as our hero exclaims that it's been a while since he made it back here. A world of light with a pair of chairs and a table with an orb placed on top. And right in front of him lies a multitude of doors. Ed stretches his body and says aloud how it took him almost a year to get back to this place, which is quite a long time. Before plopping into one of the chairs, with a sigh, he continues about how he's done his best to do his part. So now it's their turn to keep their promise, to take him home, as he stares at the orb right in front of him. Ed leans his head on his hand, exasperated, seeing how the orb won't say anything after all. He is disappointed but not surprised. He stands up and recalls the time he was suddenly transported into this place. Back then, Ed was just your ordinary mercenary living a peaceful life. And then suddenly, he was zapped into this mysterious world enveloped in white, along with an equally mysterious book. Right in front of him was a single door, making him wonder aloud what this all was. And yet, God remained silent, which is why our hero just opted to read the book. While reading it, Ed discovered that he needed to get through one of the doors to get to another world, and from there, his mission was to become the companion of the hero in that world. Furthermore, he needs to work with them for more than half a year to gain their level of trust. Once he's exiled from the hero's party, then the conditions will be met, thus returning him to the current world he's in. Reading all that just made our boy depressed because, apart from all those shenanigans, there's also a rule stating that once the door is open, it can never be opened again. Rather, there will be a new door that will lead to a brand new world. Even Ed himself couldn't help but sigh in exasperation since it's a lot to process. Never mind the elephant in the room, which is the bajillion doors right in front of him. This time, he couldn't help but say aloud that it would take him at least 100 years to get through all these doors and get exiled from them. With his fist clenched, he tells the orb how he finally did it, and asks if it's too much to get a little celebratory mood going on. I mean, the man has a point. As usual, he's met with silence. God still wouldn't answer his claims, which made him release another exasperated sigh as he crouched and hung his head low. Thinking about it now, it's really not that cool not getting any older, he noted as he stared at his reflection. Time may have stopped here, but elsewhere it continues to flow. If he trains, he'll gain muscles, and it also follows that if he eats, he'll gain weight too. The same thing with his hair. However, whenever he returns to this world, all those changes are reset, and he's back to living in the body he was in when he first came into the said world. As he stared harder at his reflection, Ed remarked how his body and spirit remained in their 20s, even though he had visited and overcome 100 different worlds and adventures. With all that said, does it mean he's just another guy who's lived a long life? Pondering on that thought made him muse about the idea that if he went back home now, he'd be over 100 years old. No one would care about him, not even his mom or the idiots he left behind. The mere thought of this made our hero laugh a little, and then just as quickly, the blurred memories of his loved ones flashed in his mind. Huh, not so funny now, is it? Well, enough with the sappy moments. Ed calls out to God or the entity out there, demanding that they fulfill their promise to take him home. Suddenly, the orb shone brightly, making him turn toward it. Looking at it now, he remembered how this crystal ball would grant him a mysterious power every time he got evicted from another world. He came to call these powers exiled skills, which include the Wanderer's Treasure, which is a mysterious different dimension storage box that can hold its content even if it goes beyond the world. Travel footprints, which automatically record the places he's been to on a map that's only visible to him. Glasses of 7 lights, which allow our hero to see the talents that lie in a dormant human, and a half-fledged counterfetter, which enables him to replicate something he has only seen once. It was thanks to all these powers that an ordinary person like him was able to make it as a member of the hero's party. And now looking at the crystal ball in front of him, he thought, why not? If it was going to give him a new skill for free, then how could he say no to that? With that, he reached his hand out to touch it, and as soon as he did, streaks of light came out as it zapped into his brain. Once he realized what it was, Ed found it hard to believe that he was about to receive this new ability. It was a one-time use ability, and thinking about it, Ed found this ability too precious to use until the last minute, when suddenly, something caught his eye from ahead. He continues to look on, thinking that a door must have appeared because of the fluctuations in space. But no, this one's different. Ed bolted right into the appearing door as he realized that more doors were always appearing right next to the last door. There had never been a door on the other side, which could only mean one thing. As he reached the door, he saw that it was door 000, a door that was there even before the beginning. This was the door that led to his world. Ed's face instantly lit up, and as he reached for the handle, he thought that if he opened it now, he could go back to the world where he was born, the one place where he'd been trying to get back to for the past 100 years. But wait, 100 years? The time in another world flows normally, so does it mean 100 years have passed in his real world? If he follows this logic, then everyone he knows and loves would be nothing but a pile of bones. Ever so quickly, he shouted and called out to God how he spent the last 100 years dedicating his life to this. In fact, it was even stolen from him. All these years he toiled and labored without understanding the reason, purpose, or meaning in all of them. He just kept doing the work forced upon him. So he continues to shout to God his ultimatum. Either God makes it up to our hero, or he could use the skills he just acquired right here and now. Was this Ed's reward for all that he did? This isn't even a reward. Our boy was about to pop off his head, shouting to the nothingness, and yet God still said nothing. Suddenly, a book fell from above, landing somewhere behind him. And as he picked it up, he wondered if it was the same as the first book. He reached for it, asking God if he wanted him to read it. And that's when our boy discovered that the digits on the number plate represent the time that has passed in the world inside the door leading to that world. Well, that's a first, but it's true. The digits are embedded there. Looking at door 000 right now, below it there's 0000. With wide eyes, he asks if this means he could go back to the exact time and place where he was kidnapped and confined. Can he really go back to that day? Our boy quickly grabbed the handle and tries to open it, only to discover that it didn't open. What's more, another book fell from the sky and bonked him right in the head, making him wonder if it was just the same book. Then he flipped it open. He saw that it contained a key, and underneath it, there was a notice that read that it was a commemoration service of his total expulsion. Our hero pulled a Gintoki face, annoyed at God for how tacky and unwanted this commemoration service is. But back to more serious matters, the key. It says in the book that the key will open the door to the other world he has visited previously, but only once, so he can revisit any world he's been in and then proceed to return to his original world. By using this key again on any door in that world he chose, he can return to this world of light. As soon as he uses it though, the key will be lost. At the same time, the door of world 000 will open, and he can finally see the world that he has walked through. Reading all of this is just one big nope from our hero. Just what the heck? If he doesn't go back to some world, the world he originally came from won't open. Thinking about all of this just made him furrow his eyebrows further. But at the same time, if the conditions for return were to be exiled again, he'd most likely lose his marbles this time. So, in a nutshell, if he just needs to use it on a door around here, then it's no biggie. The most important thing is that he goes into a suitable world and comes back right away. Easy peasy, right? With this logic in mind, our hero's mood increased, hopping from one door to the next, wondering in a sing-song voice which door he would open. And that's when he found himself standing right in front of door 001, the first door to the first world he had ever explored. Looking back, he remembered how he had a hard time since everything was new to him, being thrown into a different world with no idea what was going on. Apart from that, joining the hero's party is something that can only be done by someone branded as a hero. And at the same time, the best Ed could be was a guard in that area. There's just no way he could get in. The only saving grace that made it possible for him to join the party was the first exiled skill he received as soon as he transmigrated, Accidental Flag Bearer, where fate brought him and the hero together. That solves one problem, but for the rest, Ed had to struggle pretty badly since he doesn't have the strength to fight, and he doesn't even have the skills to be useful to his crew. Because he has no idea when he'll get thrown out of the party, he makes it his duty to become useful as an act of desperation. Our hero took it upon himself to arrange the lodgings, gather consumable supplies, carry their luggage, and collect information on their next travel destination, which is pretty much anything and everything he could think of. In all honesty, he has no idea what the others thought of him, but at least he was part of their crew for the next year and a half until he was exiled. Now that he thought about it, those guys kicked him out at the halfway point, but he couldn't help but wonder what happened after that. Staring at the door in front of him, the number plate says 10 years have passed. So that means they had enough time to defeat the Demon King. Surely this world's all nice and peaceful now, right? Since a decade has passed, that's enough time to defeat the Demon King, right? Ed's pretty confident that this world's already in its peaceful era. And with that in mind, he decides that he'd just go sightseeing in this world. Tossing the book aside, our MC starts to put the key in the keyhole, thinking that this would practically be a forced trip, which isn't so bad. However, if he said aloud how he hated everything, then it wouldn't exactly be called a lie since he did hate it. You can't blame the man. He lived a rough life the first time around. Even though there were a lot of hard times, Ed admits there were also good ones, which is why he decided to enter door 001 with no hesitation. As he walked into the light, he braced himself to once again enter the beginning of his journey to different worlds. Ed finds himself standing in a grass field, with the mountains not too far off. His eyes survey the area, wondering if this was really the place when he suddenly remembered the key he was holding. Knowing how important this object was, Ed quickly tucked it away safely since it'd be bad if he happened to lose it. Now back to this world. He starts to remember the place quite a bit, so he looks in the far off distance, remembering how there used to be a tower there, and true to his claim, there is. The Demon King should have been defeated by now, right? He kept thinking about this, so it's only natural for our MC to assume that there are no more monsters in this area. But still, you can't be too sure. As if on cue, a mound appeared from behind him, along with a striking pair of eyes. As Ed looked behind just in time to avoid the blow that quickly followed, speak of the devil, our hero was quick to resume his stance and come face to face with a giant rattlesnake, making him wonder aloud how a giant bastard like this was still around. Not that it matters, because this is the perfect opportunity for our hero to try something. Ed activates one of his skills, Stranger's Box, Wanderer's Treasury, and pulls a sword from it. He checks the item, pleased at knowing how he could easily use the exiled skills just as fine. Before turning to the monster, whose fangs are already wide open, ready to bite, Ed braces himself, smirking as he wonders aloud if this next skill would work too. And that it did. He used Invincible Impregnable Wall, which left the slithering monster in mid-motion, trembling just as its fangs were a few short centimeters away from our hero. Ed stands proud at how the monster couldn't reach him that easily, which only aggravated the latter. The giant rattlesnake changed its course of action, raising its body as high as it could before unleashing some liquid on our hero. Ed remains unimpressed at the monster's magic dissolving liquid, with the grimy stuff pouring all over him. And yet, no damage. What a way to make her MC quite OP early on, eh? Ed stood still with a smirk as his skill, Magic Absorb, Magic Curtain of Absorption, saved him from any damage. So yeah, he's still pretty cool handling both physical and magical attacks. So this time, it's his turn. After he finished off the monster, Ed returned his blade back to storage and went on his way to explore the world, musing about how he finally remembered what this world was like. Initially, he was bound to join the hero's party back then, but not anymore. This time, our hero is free to do whatever is enough to get his face morphing into excitement. And do you know what else is up? Ed realized that the Wanderer's treasure box was filled with gold and silver treasures, which got him pretty riled up to go shopping. With that in mind, he started thinking of what to buy next. Maybe an armor designed to look like the hero's gear would be nice. Or he could sell steamed buns and hero manju too. We all know how marketing works. Anything with a hero brand will be a sure hit. Now those two thoughts got him imagining himself donning a suit of armor and selling hero manju, which got him snickering. But his train of thought got cut off when his eyes noticed something in the far distance. Ed halted in his tracks and narrowed his eyes to take a better look before his face contorted to shock, as his body dashed before he can even think about it. This can't be right, but his eyes didn't deceive him. Staring in front of the ruined walls, the town really is falling apart. He walks over wondering if this place was attacked by a demonic beast, but no, the Demon King should have been defeated by now. Our hero then wondered if this was the result of the war between humans. Everywhere, there was nothing but rubble and debris as he walked on, thinking that it was only natural if humans would turn against themselves after the Demon King's death. But he couldn't believe they were able to do this much damage to each other in just 10 years. Picking up a piece of wood in his hand, Ed doesn't believe that this is part of a renovation. So just what the hell happened here? Suddenly, he hears a voice call out to him and sees a geezer, asking what he is doing there because there's nothing left to scavenge around in the area. Now that halted Ed in his tracks, but the old man was already rummaging through his sack, asking if he got false information before throwing a small bag at him. The old man tells Ed to be careful, but in his mind he wants to explain that he didn't come here to scavenge. More important than that, he asks the geezer why the place is in such bad condition, but it only confuses the older man, as he explains that it's been only 2 years since it turned into ruins, before proceeding to tell Ed that the town got completely wiped out by the Demon King's army. Now that was a shocker. Ed didn't expect to hear the words Demon King's army and 2 years ago together in a sentence like that, which made him ask the older man if the Demon King's army was still alive and well. The older man continued explaining how the Demon King's army has been wreaking havoc for a long time, and now he questions Ed why he didn't know that, prompting him to ask where our hero came from. But all this was new information for Ed, who had to make sure that he heard it right. This has been happening all this time, and if it was really the Demon King's army who did this, he asked the geezer what happened to the hero, making the latter turn to him at the mention of that word. Ed says there was a hero named Alexis, desperation laced in his voice, as he related how 10 years ago, the prince of that country, Alexis, was on the verge of subjugating the Demon King. Finally, the older man realized who he was talking about, but what Ed heard next didn't prepare him for the ugly truth. Alexis died fighting the Demon King's army 5 years ago. Huh? The hero's dead? Ed thought he misheard what the geezer said. Alexis can't die that easily, he's the hero. But then again, it also explains why there was such a big monster near this town, while the older man tells him that the ruins of this town are proof that Alexis is dead. Because if he were alive, he wouldn't allow this to happen, right? Suddenly, Ed grabbed the older man by the shoulder as he asked where the others were. There were 2 more members in the hero's party, so where were they? Taken aback by Ed's sudden movement, the older man panicked and said that maybe those 2 died together because he never even heard of them being alive. If anything, the older man laments at how terrible all of this was, especially since the hero's party gave them so much hope. He went on about how he'd been hearing talk about how fast the Demon King's army was moving forward, but he only knew up to a certain extent since the masses don't know anything else. But our guy was too stunned to speak, as he collapsed and sat on a nearby boulder, processing all that's been said. The older man remarked that it doesn't matter if you're a prince or a hero. If you die, then that's pretty much the end of it. With that, he bids Ed goodbye and urges him to get a move on as well. But Ed's way too deep in his head to notice the older man leaving. Ed was already spiraling into a breakdown because he couldn't believe Alexis was dead. He was a real hero, not a fake one like Ed. Now it just made him wonder what happened after he got exiled. You mean to say they lost and all of them are dead? Ed remembers his fallen comrades Alexis, Gonzo, and Tia, and then asks if they lost because Ed left back then. Our hero is consumed with sadness and regret, refusing to believe that this is what happened to his former party members. But on the other hand, there was no way the ending would have changed if he hadn't left their party, since he's just a mere luggage bearer. To even think like that would be too conceited of him. Suddenly, he imagines the 3 of them staring back at him as corpses. So before he could spiral further, Ed decided that he'd just confirm with his own eyes the ending of this world that he traveled to. He started by activating his exile skills and using the Akashic compass, muttering to the magical object to find the place where the hero Alexis died. In an instant, the compass showed him the place where the said hero died, confirming what he just knew. Suddenly, the compass pointed north, making him ask if this was the direction of the Demon King's castle. Ed mutters Gonzo's name this time and asks the compass where his other party member died. Again, the compass showed him the same place as Alexis, which led Ed to assume that the 2 fought and died together. Now he questions himself why he's doing this, and as if that wasn't depressing enough, was he going to find the places where they died and build a grave over them? Finally, he mutters the last member of his party, Tia, and asks the compass where she, Lunartia, died. And that's when he hears something unexpected. The compass says it is not applicable. Eh? Now that got our hero's attention. As he immediately sat up from his seat to check the place that the compass was showing him, Ed immediately asked the compass what the current location of Tia Lunardia was, worrying as he said so before showing him an image of a woodland home and pointing him in the right direction. Without wasting another moment, Ed used another one of his exiled skills, Hermes Dash, and bolted right out of the place faster than the eye could see. The only thing on his mind right now was seeing Tia again as he zoomed past places, holding on to the thought that she was alive. While thinking of her, Ed didn't get to admire the beautiful scenery and was desperate to see her sooner, which is why he activated another exiled skill, the Mirage Shift. Our man bolted past a group of geese, making it look like he was an angel with a timer over his head. Just like that, our hero traversed the world at breakneck speed, crossing mountains, snowy Alps, and even zooming past monster-filled rock formations that started to chase after him. Suddenly, the timer went off as Ed realized that the skill was no longer in effect, but fortunately for him, he managed to run past the swooping winged creatures. In the not too far off distance, a voice can be heard from the dark castle, calling out to his demon brothers and sisters. The voice continues and encourages its brethren about how this expedition will conquer another human town, ending their very lives. He ushers their demon army, telling them to march ahead and destroy everything in their way, which pretty much looked like a scene taken out of the Lord of the Rings movie. The army had orcs and monsters alike, but they weren't prepared for the incoming explosive force that was zooming past their army. Our hero was still in a frenzy, telling them to move out of his way, making both orcs and monsters fly off from the force of his run. They didn't even have time to process what just happened. Soon enough, things started to settle down, and the scenery turned to a woodland setting. All that running got Ed panting so hard, but he wordlessly walked on and got his eyes fixed on the compass as it pointed north. Finally, he raised his head and sees a home built in one of the larger tree trunks as he stares in awe at what he's seeing. And then it hit him. He doesn't have a souvenir for her. He tried patting his clothes to see if he's got anything, then turned to rummaging in his dimensional storage for something he could give her. There must be something decent here, right? Finally, his hand touched something, and he pulled out a couple of orange fruits. He's pretty sure Tia liked sweet fruits, which he put into a basket to make them more presentable. As he stood right in front of her door to knock, Ed stopped himself at the last minute as his brain started to overthink again. What would Tia think of his sudden appearance? As far as he knows, he's just a troublemaker who got exiled from the hero's party. And if a person suddenly appeared like that on her doorstep, would she be able to greet him with a smile? But Ed decided to cast his insecurities aside, steeling himself and reminding himself that he didn't come all the way here just to run away. With that, he gave a few knocks and took a deep breath, and he was met with silence. Eh? Ed tried knocking harder this time, even asking if anybody's home, before desperately pressing his face against the door. Is she not home? Either Ed's too strong or Tia's door is not locked properly, because suddenly our hero finds himself stepping right into her home. In a panic, he pointed out that the door was open, and he didn't mean to come inside without permission, but all he heard was a familiar voice asking who it was. As he finally looks up at the loft, he finally sees her there. Tia, lying on her stomach, asking, "Who's there?" Tia stares back at him, thinking it hard to believe that it is Ed, as she asks herself if she is still dreaming. An emotion Ed very much mirrored as he stared back up at her. She finally sits up and asks if it really is him, while Ed stares at her yellow hair, similar to the sun, and jade-colored eyes. It's really her. He was just about to greet Tia when suddenly she jumped straight at him with her arms extended for a hug. And here was her boy, thinking that she looked the same as she did 100 years ago. But all of that went out the window when Tia latched onto his neck excitedly and called out his name. Now this was a little too close for comfort, with our hero panicking since he's not used to such skinship. But screw personal space. Tia's unaware of how comfortable he was since she was busy pinching his cheeks, asking if he was really there. And right when she thought she'd never see him alive again. Now that she snapped him back to reality, what did she mean by saying she'll never see him alive again? That's an exaggeration. By the way, Ed's still carrying her in his arms, just as Tia told him that no one knows who he is when he was supposed to be famous too as part of the hero's party. Well, he can't really deny that, so he could concede to her, leaning far back to put some distance between their faces. They continue talking in that position, with Ed explaining how he didn't want to worry them and citing how it wouldn't look good for him if people knew he was exiled from the hero's party. Because of that, he made up an excuse, saying he changed his name and started working in a different country, a reason she readily accepts. Well, technically he's not wrong, since he did return to the white world after he got exiled. But all that overthinking was cast aside as soon as he saw her beaming smile, with Tia expressing how glad she was to know that he was safe. With a little blush dusting his cheeks, this would have been an ideal shoujo moment, if only they weren't in such an awkward position, with Ed close to breaking his back and Tia falling over. He sets her down in the nearest chair, and that's when she realizes all the orange fruit on the floor that fell from his basket. Tia's eyes started twinkling as she asked why there were so many of them, while Ed said it was his souvenir for her. She felt flattered and then proceeded to tell him that there was no bath in her home. How and why those two are connected, we don't know, because it seems Ed also got confused as he asked why she would even go to the trouble to eat it in a bathtub. That's when Tia said orange fruit is actually eaten after cutting and washing it in the bath because it smells good and makes her skin feel soft and smooth. He counters and says that if she just eats it normally, then it would taste just as delicious. All he got was a judgmental look from her as he appealed that it was the truth and that it was absolutely delicious. He offered to cut it for her then, promising Tia that it was super sweet as she sat and waited. After a moment, Tia spoke up and asked him why his clothes were so tattered, but the latter only laughed it off, saying how he'd been traveling around the world for a while just so he could see an old lady he used to know. This made her chuckle, while Ed could only wonder aloud why he worked so hard like that, not knowing that Tia smiled a little at what he said. Since he was busy with the fruits, she decided to change her clothes and urged him to take his time. As soon as she was out of sight, Ed finally got time to process what just happened. Tia was in her pajamas. Just then, she peeked from the curtain and asked if he would like to change together, which she refused with a hard no. If you can't tell yet, our hero is not exactly a ladies' man. Ed's well aware that he's never been popular with women, even from back then, and the mere act of Tia casually touching his body and bringing her face close to his is enough to leave him shaking. So he's a simp in a way? Is that it? Or an incel may be a better word, but back to the story. Ed finally finished cutting the fruit, and as he set it on the table, his eyes wandered the place, taking in what Tia's home looked like. Then he turned his attention to the 4 chairs before walking over to the room on the side, hidden by a curtain. As he drew it aside, Ed saw 3 futons inside when suddenly, he heard Tia's voice as she apologized for making him wait. Ed was quick to deny this, but his words got caught in his mouth when he saw what she was wearing. The elf was in her battle suit, shyly asking him if he thought it was weird. Our boy was dumbfounded, staring back at her as he wondered why she was wearing the same clothes she wore back then. Being the overthinker that he was, his mind was already in overdrive, formulating a lot of questions at the speed of light, when suddenly Tia reached out her hand. That startled Ed, but she only told him to take it off and started to sew Ed's tattered cloak. While doing so, Tia wanted to make sure the fruits were not sour, and Ed assured her that they were not. If they turned out to be sour, then Ed proposes she could ask him anything. Upon hearing that, she immediately turns to him and asks him to feed her. Ed raises his voice, wondering why, and tells her to eat it herself. But Tia points out that she's got her hands full fixing his clothes, which is why she hoped he would feed her. She's got a point, so with a trembling hand, he fed her a piece, only for Tia to cry out how sour it was. Now that got him panicking. Did he get it wrong? Just to make sure, Ed bit one, and his face almost convulsed trying to rein in his annoyance. It tasted sweet, and Tia was just joking around with him. Tia was already giggling as he commented on how childish her pranks were, but the elf reminded her that they used to play a lot together like this back then. That's not how our hero remembers it, and if anything, it was just him being one-sidedly toyed with, and on Tia's part, she thought she was being affectionate towards him. When he heard that, he complained at how much she teased an innocent young man, so much so that he almost slipped and revealed other things. However, when he thinks about it, Tia is an elf who's over 100 years old, even though she looks young. So for her, it was like playing with a small child. And back then, he did everything in his power so she wouldn't get the wrong impression of him. Ed, acting to please them, ended up in a not-so-pleasing conclusion to their party. Rather than losing his head, he could only sigh at how much she hasn't changed at all, smiling as he commented that it was what he expected of the woman who exiled him from the party. As soon as he says that, Ed was filled with regret and tried to backtrack. It's not like he bore any grudges. He was just reminiscing about the old days. In reply, Tia tells him in a quiet voice that she's sorry. Ed wasn't done apologizing and he even gave her a 90-degree bow. But Tia's demeanor had already changed. Since she had her face hung low, Tia asked her if Ed didn't come here to blame her, leaving our hero confused as he asked what she was talking about. That's when Tia simply said that she was the only one who survived, while Ed only looked at her. After a moment of silence, he asked if she could tell him what happened, which she did, and she continued to sew his cloak while narrating what happened next. According to her, right after he led, their party tried to find someone else to take Ed's place, but it was easier said than done. When Ed left, they were quite near the front line of their battle against the Demon King's army, so the only ones who answered the recruitment call were those who wanted to fight with them to obtain their achievements. As for the hero's party, all they wanted was for someone who could manage their baggage so that they could fight as hard as they could. For them, they can't get along with someone who could easily abandon their baggage to go off and fight. Tia shared how they hired about 6 people to take Ed's place, but every one of them quit soon. As a result, their party just decided to hire a professional porter, but even that person left after working with them for 3 months. Huh? Hearing a professional porter quit sounds incredulous to Ed, though he's aware that he's also one who made the mistake of quitting. Tia says the professional porter only carried their luggage, whereas Ed did a lot more for them. Apart from carrying the luggage, Ed also did the cleaning and cooking for them, among many other things. Once he heard that, Ed remembered how he wanted to stay at the party so much that he tried his best to have his presence felt on the team. Tia continued the story, saying how they all misunderstood Ed's hard work as the norm, which was why Alexis demanded the same thing from everyone they hired. When one of the hires heard their demands, he suggested that they should hire a servant or a maid instead. Alexis didn't like that, so he drove the man away, while Ed commented in his head that if they were going to use him as their standard, then the team would surely get angry. She continued that they didn't have the luxury of time, and they only realized the value of the person they exiled after they did it, which made her grit her teeth. Back to her story, she says they were having a hard time then because no one wanted to accept their job offer anymore, until one day they were approached by someone. This masked person said that he would carry any kind of luggage and that he would also be more than happy to do any chores, so Alexis gladly accepted them, including her and Gonzo. Since they finally have the last person they need on the team, the hero's party resumes their activities, with the recruit even doing his job pretty well. After some time, they finally made it through the demon world. When the deep forest ended, they arrived at the Demon King's domain and were welcomed by a group of monsters. Tia already had a hunch about what they would face, which is why she came prepared and ready. But that was all for nothing when the person they hired ran away. Along with him, he took the healing potions and magic tools they had, with the figure of the porter disappearing in a blue light. When he heard that, Ed sat up, asking if the porter used a teleportation crystal, which Tia affirmed. She continues how she had prepared enough for everyone so they could return to the royal capital in case of emergency. The teleportation crystals were supposed to be broken to use them, so you don't want to accidentally break them in the middle of a fight. Tia entrusted everyone shared to their porter, while Ed couldn't believe what he was hearing. He asked if the porter got scared and ran away, but he didn't think so. No one would travel through the demon world with the hero's party after all those years just to run away, unless this person intended to betray them from the beginning because of their baggage, which got Ed even more riled up. He asked if their porter conveniently entered the troubled hero's party and kept looking for opportunities, but didn't push Tia to answer. She continued the story, saying they had no choice but to fight when suddenly a demonic beast came out of the demon's world behind them. Gonzo managed to hold the monster off from attacking Tia, but it was evident that they were caught between a rock and a hard place with nothing else to do and nowhere else to go. Gonzo called out to Alexis while Tia moved over to cover him. You see, to avoid the worst case scenario, one teleportation crystal was planted in the heart of Alexis's armor. So no matter what happened, he could use it to ensure that the hero returned alive and the world never lost hope. Tia ushers him to leave since he's the hero chosen by God, the prince of a great country, and the one they decided to follow. Suddenly, Alexis puts the crystal in Tia's hand, saying how there's no way a hero could do such an uncool thing and abandon his comrades to survive alone. Before she could do anything, Alexis had already crushed the crystal, igniting the teleportation powers of the crystal as she was sent away. Recalling everything that happened made Tia start to cry, while Ed could do nothing and lament the loss of his comrades. At the end of the day, Alexis chose his pride instead of the hero's mission, and it was just like him to make the wrong choice without hesitation. By now, Tia's full on sobbing as Ed tells Alexis that he's not the only one who can't survive by abandoning your friends. After crying for some more, Tia finally calmed down, with Ed asking if she was alright now. She said sorry again and also thanked him. The story didn't end there, because soon, Tia found herself in a secret room in the castle of Notland, while several men came clamoring around her, asking what happened to the prince and why she was there. What's worse is that they thought she stole Alexis's teleportation crystal and escaped alone when she suddenly heard the king's voice call out to her. The king asked what happened to Alexis, so Tia explained what happened to him, and upon learning what happened to his son, the king ordered Tia to hide herself in the middle of nowhere. He also decided to proclaim that the hero's party was wiped out after crossing the demon world. Ed was about to react violently when he realized that it was the best course of action the king could take. Alexis weighed the future of the world against the lives of his comrades and opted for the latter. And knowing him, that was the best course of action, he thought. But the thing is, he was also the hero, and he just made the grave mistake of making the wrong decision. Ed couldn't fathom how Alexis went to great lengths to save Tia, only for his comrades to be replaced. But ultimately, the only thing Ed could say was that the king respected his son's final wish. Tia says that because of that, she couldn't take part in the next 3 expeditions to the demon world, which was a surprise for our hero. Were there other expeditions? Seeing his reaction, Tia turned to ask just how far away he lived if even he didn't know that, but Ed could only laugh and reply. Back to the story, Tia says the allied nations sent forces 3 times to rescue Alexis, even when they knew they couldn't break through the demon world with an army. According to her, they tried everything in their power just for a ray of hope, since there was no more heroes left to fight, but it was all in vain. Well, now that she remembers it, Tia hiding in this woodland home is actually a secret, which made her question him about how he found this place. Our hero simply said that he was wondering what everyone else was doing and recently acquired a magical tool that allows him to search for people. However, when he tried to search for Alexis and Gonzo, the tool didn't respond, which only confirmed what Tia knew all along. He apologizes for sharing such news, but Tia says it's actually refreshing that she got to face reality. Plus, there was no way the 2 of them could survive against an army that big. He was about to call out to him when she showed off his repaired cloak, with flowers adorning the stitch. Ed smiled back at her when suddenly the ground started to shake, prompting Ed to check what was happening outside. There he sees a lesser dragon has found its way to Tia's home, making him wonder if it was a stray that came down from the mountains, which was pretty unusual. Tia got out as well, asking him why he went out, and before he could answer, Tia ordered him to get back inside since she'd take care of the monster. As if on cue, the dragon unleashed its fiery breath, and while Ed was pretty confident that he could deal with this much, Tia pulled him back right before the attack made contact with his body. The elf unleashed a water wall, much to Ed's amazement, as Tia stood in between him and the dragon, vowing that no one would die and that she would protect Ed. Tia starts her incantation for her next technique just as the lesser dragon flies farther to brace for the next attack. Before the dragon could sink its claws into Tia, the elf unleashed her tri-edged stream, sending a flurry of slashes that cut the dragon in one hit. As the monster's body fell, Ed got pretty hyped up after seeing Tia's one-hit blow, which was an instant kill. He went on admiring how sharp the technique was since it managed to cut not only the dragon's bones, but its scales as well. He was gushing about how Tia got so much better when she reached out to him, panting and saying he should get out. Seeing her state, he was confused and asked what was wrong, but she was already chuckling and panting. Finally, Tia looks up to him and admits that she wants to look cool and show off, but it looks like she got a little too excited, and at the same time, she assures him that she's fine. Ed knew better than that since it was pretty obvious that she was in bad shape, but Tia assured him that it was only because she hadn't fought in so long. Throwing a peace sign, she musters a smile, saying she dressed up in front of Ed to look amazing and that, in the end, he just let her be. She climbs onto her loft and remembers that she was a member of the hero's party, so he assumes she'll be just fine. However, he couldn't get what she said out of his mind. What did she mean by get out of here? Well, it's not like the answers will present themselves, so Ed decided that for now, he'll just get rid of the dragon's carcass and think about it later. Looking at the carcass, Ed decided to just put it in the Wanderer's treasurer box, as it is since the contents don't normally rot. He was musing about cutting up the dragon meat when he heard a loud thud. He peeked in from the door calling out to Tia, and when she didn't answer, he went in, asking if something was wrong. When Tia still didn't reply, he called out from below, saying she'd come up when he finally saw her body on the floor. Ed moves closer, asking why she fell and moves to turn her body to his when he is welcomed by a shocking sight. Tia's upper body is covered with black bruises spreading from her heart to her whole body like a whole patch of dead skin. Tia could only muster the word close as Ed set her in bed to recover. After some time, he asks how she feels and says that she's calmed down a bit, thanking him for his help. Feeling bad that he discovered it this way, Tia says she didn't want to hide it from him and explained that she used the elf secret technique when she fought with Alexis and the others back then so they could all survive. This technique explosively increases the power of spirit magic by mixing one's own life with the magic. When he heard that, Ed's eyes widened as he confirmed what he's been thinking all along. The price she paid was her own lifespan. Our poor boy's been through much in one day already, feeling even more distressed hearing how Tia just used her own lifespan. Give this man a break! Hold up, wasn't she okay just a while ago? So what made her collapse all of a sudden? No sooner than Ed said that, he realized what she had done. She used all of her lifespan on that one attack for the lesser dragon. Tia could only giggle, but in her defense, she thought Ed would be killed if she didn't kill the dragon in one strike. Hearing her say that just made Ed wonder why she thought he would be killed. That's when he realized that she had no idea of his abilities, just as the elf added that she didn't have much magic to live in the first place. For her, the clothes she wore were the only thing keeping her together, because when she wore them, she was able to share the magic that the tree gathered with her, thus enabling her to stay alive. However, when she took the clothes off and used that kind of magic, Tia believed she didn't think she could live much longer than this. But Ed doesn't get it. What does her clothing have to do with it? Just as Tia answered him with a chuckle, saying how she was so happy to see him that she wanted things to be the same as they were before. Unfortunately, it looks like she failed again because she took off her clothes and let the magic power of the tree slip out. What's more, the demonic beast seemed to have already noticed her, which explains why the lesser dragon came. Ed was quiet as he started to blame himself. Everything was his fault and how he was such an ill-omened person. He wonders if this is what happens when someone gets too cocky with their powers. He couldn't believe he ran all the way here to check if Tia was safe, only to find out all of this. Seeing how stressed he was, Tia gently touches his cheek, telling him not to make such a sad face. Pressing her forehead against his, she tells him that she may have lived a short life for an elf, but she lived it to the fullest and longer than most. Moreover, she was able to meet some good friends, and she got to meet Ed again too. Ed didn't like that she was talking as if she were saying goodbye when he suddenly felt their presence. He slowly got up, telling her that he had been working hard on his own ever since he was exiled from the group. He even shares how he's been on adventures Tia couldn't imagine before looking her straight in the eye to say that he's strong now. With that said, this time, Ed says he'll be the one to protect Tia. Outside her woodland home, Ed sees an army of monsters of different kinds and sizes ready to attack. Even from her bed, Tia could see how many monsters were out there, but Ed was already up, walking toward the horde, but not before he assured her and promised her that he'd never leave her alone again. Tia started fumbling in bed, desperate to keep Ed in check, but all our hero could think about was how Tia was still trying to stand up for him despite the dire situation. Finally, time for some action. Our hero quickly went to work as he took down the nearest monster in a flash. While doing so, he knows that taking down a herd of demonic beasts won't bring back his dead comrades, but still, he refuses to end it like this. Ed comes face to face with the stone golem and activates his skill, blood swordsmithing, as he desperately wishes for a miracle or whatever that will allow the current him to return to the old days. Before the monsters could react, Ed had already unleashed a combination of high-speed slashes and thrusts, taking them all down before they could even fight back. Just then, an idea popped into his mind. There was a recent skill he just got, a one-time ability that works like that. He turns to meet Tia's eyes as he wonders if he uses that exiled skill, can't he just start all over again? The scene opens up with a distant memory as Ed walks into Tia's room, asking if there's something she'd like to discuss, and he's welcomed by the very sight of Tia in the middle of taking her clothes off. Ed could only clutch his chest as she let out a yell. The next thing we know, Ed is on his knees in front of Tia, while Gonzo and Alexis remain silent at the back. The elven lady expressed her disappointment and just as quickly dismissed Ed from their team, saying she couldn't travel with them anymore. Ed got up wordlessly, and as soon as he was out of the room, Alexis commented that this was a pretty elaborate way to get rid of the hindrance, but Tia thought it was okay. If she didn't do this much, then she's pretty sure Ed will continue to follow her, and she's at the point where she can't protect him anymore. Clutching her clothes tightly, she knows Ed will hate her for it, but she always wanted him to see the world in peace. Cut to the current, Ed sheaths his sword, exhaling now that he's done fighting the monsters. He looks back at Tia with a smile, saying how he was able to protect her. Shocked at what she just saw, all Tia could ask was if he was really that strong. Ed jumps over to where she is, briefly explaining how he started training again after he was expelled from the hero's party. Out of the blue, she asked if he could take her to the border of the demon world, feeling a little nervous as she said it. Tia was also quick to add that it's fine if he can't do it, but Ed pats her hard, saying he'll take her with him even if it's to the end of the world. Feeling her heart swell at the words, she thanked him, all while Ed said to himself that he wouldn't ask her what's in there because he doesn't need to. He already knows what's in there. Ed makes a makeshift seat for Tia, which would allow her to sit on his back comfortably, but not before checking with her first if she feels okay. When she gives him the go, the two set out just as Ed thinks that all he needs to do now is fulfill Tia's wish. They traveled far and wide, crossing seas and deserts, and before they knew it, they had reached the place. Ed had to make sure they were in the right location, but Tia assured him that they were, asking him to put her down. It was a barren land, illuminated by the night sky under 1,000 stars. As Tia recalls how Alexis used a teleportation crystal on her, she thanks Ed and starts to talk to Alexis and Gonzo, telling her old comrades how Ed brought her to this place. She sits down as she continues to tell the two how Ed has gotten so much stronger than she ever thought. She even brags about how he was able to pass through the demon world in a night, remembering how they had a hard time going through it. Tia even dared to say that Ed may even be much stronger than Alexis right now, chuckling as she said so. With her head hung low, she asks Ed if he remembers the day she exiled him and admits that she's been thinking about it for a long time. She tells him then that she didn't want a weak Ed to die, but then again, that may have been her weakness because she couldn't believe in him. Ed finally sits next to her and agrees. Both of them look up just as Tia goes on about how Ed, whom she thought she needed to protect all along, became strong enough to protect her. She wonders if everyone would have seen a glimpse of a peaceful world after the defeat of the Demon King, if only she hadn't done anything unnecessary. Ed was about to deny this, but Tia called out to him and leaned her head on his shoulder as she thanked him for bringing him there. Just like this, she wishes that she could have granted his wish too, while Ed quietly tells her that his wish will come true soon. She takes his hand in hers and intertwines them as she asks what his wish is, with Ed replying that it's been a while since he went home. Hearing that, Tia says she'd like to see his house too, which got him babbling about how his mom is more than happy to welcome her and that he needs to buy souvenirs for both his parents. Now that he thinks about it, Ed says he'll have to introduce Tia to any idiots who want to rob him once he makes a lot of money. And with these exiled skills, he proclaims how he can almost do anything. Tia leans quietly on his side with a smile, just as he continues to say how he can defeat a demonic beast and become an aristocrat with that achievement. And maybe one day, he'll even become a lord of the kingdom. But Ed couldn't finish what he was saying because Tia was already gone. Tia passed, leaning onto Ed with a smile on her face, just as our hero wondered if this was also part of God's plan. He continues to talk to God, claiming how he's been doing God's bidding for the last 100 years. So this must be how it ends, right? This was the reason why he was given all those skills, right? He throws a punch in the air, proclaiming how he'll keep on dancing on God's palm until he bears a hole in it. So in exchange, Ed tells the higher being to make his wish come true. Take his past, future, and everything he has as he activates final exiled skill unlimited, one-time claim. A second later, a beam of light zapped our hero, and when he opened his eyes, all he could see was white. He's back in the white world, surveying the white scenery and what else was there? A chair and table. For a moment, Ed wonders if he's dreaming, then bolts right up with a shout. He panics upon realizing that this is not a dream, asking how he got here. Was he kidnapped while he was sleeping or did he die? Okay, first of all, he told himself to calm down so he could assess the situation better. He tried to recall the job he received today, and it was about exterminating the claw moles and pests that were ravaging the fields. After finishing his tasks, he ate lunch and went to a nearby forest to destroy the nest later that afternoon. He was about to recall the next part when he noticed a door standing in the middle of nothingness. Right behind him, there was a loud thunk, making him jump as he saw a white book had fallen from somewhere. With his curiosity getting the better of him, Ed started to read the book, and as he finished it, he read about how he was exiled from the world he was in. What's more, if he wants to go back, then he needs to join the hero's party in 100 different worlds so that if he gets exiled from all of them, he can finally go home. Hell no, he ain't doing that. Ed went full ham wondering why he needed to get exiled in the first place, and he had to join a hero's party too. He's just a mere mercenary, so there's no way he could do that. Just then, the sphere started emitting a bright light, so he cautiously approached it, remembering what the book said, that if he touched it, then he'd get some kind of useful power, which sounded so shady. But what else could he do? He just wants to go home. So in the end, Ed goes with self-assertion and touches the sphere. No sooner than he did, memories like streaks of light zapped into his mind. He stood still, wondering what that was, as his exiled skills from before started to pour into him. He also noted that these skills weren't all that useful when suddenly, an image of 3 people with their faces covered flashed in his mind. He thought those 3 were from somewhere when suddenly, the sphere zapped all the information he had from the last 100 years right into his mind, leaving him helpless and thunderstruck as all the memories poured in. It was too much for him, seeing all these memories of him being exiled by people he never met, as well as the worlds he visited. And just when he couldn't take it anymore, another memory of a man telling him not to give up so they could change the past flashes too. Now on all fours, the picture of Tia flashes in his mind as she asks him what he wishes for in the future. After it was over, he realized that this was his wish, snickering as he told God that he outwitted him and won the bet. In exchange for the one-time claim, Ed obtained an essentially impossible power. The power of the 101st is the best exiled skill that can even deceive God, and it's one more game, blessing of the second lap. His current self, who just arrived in the world, inherits all the memories and abilities his future self acquired back then. Ed knows that he can never use the skill again, since it's a one-time use, and miracles don't happen twice. Still, this was enough for him. He touches his shoulder where Tia leaned, as he believes he can do it now. Since he's been successfully exiled from all the worlds and is now unrivaled with the strongest power, Ed vows to change the future into a happy ending as he walks to door 001 to kickstart the second lap. Here's to starting a new world once again, and in contrast to the beautiful town, a man feels distressed after suffering rejection, borderline pleading that he's capable. But Alexis ignores it. The latter continues to slice his steak, telling the man to use his inside voice and also apologizing for rejecting the other man's application. As far as Alexis could see, hiring him would be pointless, though he has to admit that this guy looks strong enough to carry their supplies if he's interested. The girls behind them fawn over Alexis, aware that he's Hiro-sama, while the others wonder if the guy he was talking to was applying to the hero's party. Seeing how Alexis has rejected 3 people so far, the girls were still so busy gushing about Alexis that they failed to sense the hooded man, who managed to blend in with the crowd and emit an intent toward the hero. Alexis turned in the girls' direction, making them wonder if he was staring at them, but the hero felt a nagging feeling. Before he could probe further, the hooded man now sits in front of Alexis and introduces himself as the strongest luggage carrier and swordsman. Alexis wondered when this man moved, but instead, he opted to ask who he was. By now, all eyes were on them as the hooded man's sudden appearance drew curious figures. And what's even more interesting is that even Alexis turned serious. And yes, it's our boy Ed. It figured it would be best to create an air of mystery, hence the hood and enigmatic persona. But he still introduced himself as a wandering adventurer named Ed. Looking back, Ed actually met Alexis by accident during his first time here, while he was wandering the town. Back then, Ed clung to Alexis, begging and pleading with him to let him join the hero's party. But the latter refused. It wasn't until Ed offered to work for free that they allowed him to become their luggage carrier. But knowing what Ed knows now, he realizes that what he did back then wasn't the best course of action. If he worked merely as their luggage carrier, then he wouldn't have any control over the journey ahead. Back to the present, Alexis questions Ed about how he will fight if he's got his hands full carrying their pieces of luggage. But our boy already stood up with Alexis' steak in tow and proposed a demo. He'll defeat Alexis all while carrying the plate of steak in his hand. In his mind, Ed thinks it's risky to ignore how things played out the first time, which is why he decided to showcase his skill as a swordsman too, so that Alexis would acknowledge his strength. Grabbing the fork, Alexis thrusts it with enough force to get the ground cracking, agreeing with Ed's proposal. He says that if Ed doesn't drop that luggage, then he'll consider him to join the party. That was more than enough for our main character, who even gives leeway, telling Alexis he could have the first move. But before he could finish his sentence, there was an object that flew straight to Ed's face. Thanks to his god tier reflex, he managed to block the fork in time, as he asked if Alexis was disappointed with the move. The prince only remarked how Ed has a very big mouth, though he's got some skills too. Just when Alexis is about to say something about a cold steak, Ed cuts him off, saying it's not very tasty, so he asks the former if he would like to surrender. Alexis goes on the offense, but Ed manages to block his attacks each time. The two continue their fight, taking it to the rooftops as Alexis continues to fight using the fork, and Ed uses his sword in defense. In his mind, Ed remembers that the hero accepts all challenges, no matter who or when, to showcase his strength because it's the #1 duty bestowed upon him. After all, the hero is a strong individual, and the people accept him because they witnessed that truth. This was also the reason why it's been foretold that the hero will defeat the Demon King. To join the hero's party, extreme strength is necessary, so you can stand before people as their hope and show that strength. Ed notes that if Alexis loses faith in his strength, then he'll never be acknowledged by the former. After parrying Alexis' attacks, the fork finally gives in as the two find themselves standing on the rooftops. Ed tries to taunt him, commenting how the steak is getting colder, and urges the prince to turn up the heat. In his mind, our boy wanted to show Alexis that he was not just a simple luggage carrier. He could trust him to have his back. Finally, Alexis starts to draw his sword while acknowledging the fact that Ed is capable of something or two. With Alexis' sword drawn, Ed braces himself as the former lunges at him, the two blades meeting in a flash. To Alexis' surprise, he didn't expect Ed to parry his attacks continuously. And once again, the latter taunts him that he could do better. Surely, this isn't all there is to a hero's skill, right? As the proclaimed hero, the prince decides to rise up to the challenge, and this time he intends to hit Ed with an attack from below. Ed manages to block it, but after saying all that, the hero does have some crazy skills. He moves back once he realizes his own cheap sword doesn't stand a chance against Alexis's, especially since he can feel his sword is nearing its limit already. A quick peek and he sees that it's already chipped all over when suddenly Ed realizes a bigger problem. The meat slid from the plate. But as he looked below, he noticed Alexis was in a familiar stance, a bright light emanating from the hero as he tells our boy that he'll show him a true hero strike if he's so hellbent on running off his mouth. Alexis unleashes the Moonlight Sword, which is a sparkling slash about to hit Ed head on. As for our main character, he could easily deflect it using Impregnable Fortress, but decided against it because he wants to be acknowledged as one of the hero's true companions. He braces himself, thinking that he has to overcome this with a sword, and that's the reason why he spent 100 years training for it. From the ground, Alexis was observing Ed's move in midair, and when he realized what the latter was about to do, he signaled using his palm. Ed was pretty busy focusing on matching the direction of his swing to the trajectory of the slash as he parried Alexis' attack. The prince only hummed, seeing what Ed did just as our boy landed safely, though his sword was already broken. At least he made that work somehow when, out of the blue, he was surrounded by cheers as the townsfolk sang praises of how cool he was. For many of them, this was the first time they'd ever seen someone who was a match for the hero, while one of the girls from before started to see Ed in a new light. She was wondering what his name was when a voice answered and told her it was Ed, pointing out that he introduced himself earlier. The geezer also praised Ed for his talent despite being a commoner. But more important than that, just who the heck is he? The girls didn't expect to converse with the random old man, and before he could introduce himself, he got kicked out of the panel. Back to Ed, Alexis walks over to him as her boy calls him out for using a move like that. He could have killed anyone with that. Instead of answering directly, the prince just questioned him back, asking if he really thought he'd allow something like that to happen. A loud voice boomed from behind, calling Ed a straight sprout. Ed turns to see Gonzo looming behind him, explaining that if the standard screening process was to take a serious attack from the hero, then even he wouldn't make the cut. Our boy was just about to call him old man, but he caught himself, addressing him as Gonzo the monk instead. Gonzo continued that in case Ed hadn't noticed yet, Alexis decided to push him hard, and that right before it got serious, he gave Gonzo a signal to jump in case things got too dangerous. Explanations aside, Gonzo's more curious about how Ed knows him, and our boy started blabbering, saying he's popular because he's the world's strongest martial artist with legendary healing hands. And that was enough to butter the older man up, laughing as he claims how his muscles are the strongest, which Ed does too, commenting how he finds it weird that he's also the party's frontline healer. And that's when Ed heard another familiar voice, calling out to both Alexis and Gonzo. She asks them what they were doing and thinks that they're just about to leave. Alexis tells her that he is just showcasing a bit of his glory to a certain stupid commoner to mind their station. She reprimands Gonzo too for failing to stop Alexis, but the older man just brushed it off. Ed starts to slowly turn toward her, thinking that this is supposed to be the first time he hears her voice, but hearing it right now just makes his heart burst in nostalgia. Finally, Tia calls out to him and asks Ed if he's okay or if he's hurt anywhere, but Ed stood there silently staring at her as she introduced herself as Lunardia, an elvish spirit user. She goes on about how she's traveling together with Alexis, while our boy introduces himself as a luggage carrier and swordsman. The three started looking at him weirdly as Ed's vision started to blur, thinking that he finally got to see Tia smile again. As it turns out, Ed didn't realize he was already crying, which left the three party members stunned. Tia starts to panic, asking why he is crying and asking if it was something she said, but all he can think about is that Tia is alive. She's in front of him right now. Since Ed didn't answer when she asked if something was wrong, the elven lady turned to Alexis, asking what the hero did to the former. Knowing how the hero is, Alexis tried to brush off Tia's accusations. Moreover, he doesn't do anything out of the ordinary, although he does take pride in being strong. As if that wasn't enough of a show-off, Alexis even claims that his very existence is considered out of the ordinary. So yeah, we have a narcissistic Bishonen here. Even Tia couldn't grasp what was going on in the hero's mind. But before they could continue with their conversation, Ed cut in and told her that it was not Alexis's fault. While still wiping the tears from his eyes, our boy just said to them that he felt overwhelmed that the esteemed hero's party actually asked for his name. Tia doesn't sound too convinced, asking him if that was really it, even offering to help. But instead of taking her offer, Ed just asked if she could repeat his name once more. As soon as she did, Ed instantly beamed, making Tia giggle at how strange this human was, not knowing that from the back, Alexis was observing them with narrowed eyes, finding it hard to believe that this strange man would be that happy after getting his name called. Finally, the hero cut in on their conversation, understanding why Ed would cry over something like that as he pointed to the luggage he was supposed to be protecting that was on the ground. Because the stakes already ruined, the hero proclaimed that he couldn't accept Ed, which made our boy go from shock to distress real quick. Lamenting over the spoiled meat, cursing Alexis' technique as he said so, but the hero is also pretty upset because that's his stake, remember? Stake issue aside, Tia's more shocked that they aren't accepting Ed, her saucer-like eyes trained on the hero. She couldn't believe the former refused to let him into their party, especially since Ed's on par with Alexis' strength. Now that's a jab on the hero's ego. But before he could refute it, Tia already got the townsfolk agreeing with her, stressing how Alexis used a special move. The hero clicked his tongue and then asked Tia why she wanted Ed on the team, seeing how they already had the combat power that they needed. In reply, the elven lady simply told him that she has a feeling that they need to take him because he is strong. And when Alexis pointed out that they already have him, he just got a unanimous boo from her and the townsfolk. This time, she turns to Gonzo, and the old man says he really doesn't care, but he stresses that it's a difficult job to work as a porter and a combatant. It wasn't ideal to put their porter in such a reckless position, which is why he agreed with Alexis' point. This time, it was Ed who expressed frustration, clenching his fist and saying how he really wanted to learn about the glory of muscles from Gonzo himself, and that was all it took for the older man to side with him. Gonzo even said he'd take care of Ed, the sprout. Well, our boy sure knew how to win the old man over. Since the majority already had their votes, Alexis was left with no choice but to concede, admitting that Ed's swordsmanship was quite good. He even went as far as praising our boy, saying he may be the strongest one out there, aside from the hero itself. And with that, Alexis tossed a coin to the latter. The hero told him that what they were looking for was a porter, so they didn't need combat strength. But if Ed could fulfill both roles, then he had no complaints. Alexis had Ed take an additional test, instructing him to buy all the goods he thinks are necessary for their journey and to bring them to Alexis, throwing back what the latter said to him before about being the best baggage carrier, so he should prove it. Ed gladly took Alexis' challenge, promising to do it right while the three left him be. Checking the coins he received, Ed sees that the hero gave him 10 silver coins when he suddenly realizes something. These are gold coins! Ed remembered that during his first one, Alexis gave him silver coins, but now the latter has given him so much more, which made our boy wonder if the hero trusts him more this time. Regardless of that, with this amount, he'll be able to buy a lot more. His train of thought suddenly got interrupted when a voice sounded from behind, saying how they thought they knew all there was to know about the area, but they were surprised to see that the town had a place like that. It was Tia. Now that he remembered she was here, Ed started addressing her formally, which she quickly corrected. Leaning closer to him, Tia narrowed her eyes at him and reminded him how Ed had just called out to her without any honorifics a moment ago. This just made her question why he was suddenly calling her Tia-san, to which Ed replied that it was because she was a senpai. Tia cut him off, telling him that Tia is just okay. So now, back to his question, he asks why Tia tagged along with him. The elven lady said she was curious, wondering aloud how Ed would use the money before telling him to stop being too polite. Upon hearing that, Ed comments that he thinks it's a bit too careless of her to just tag along because of that. Hearing him say that made Tia chuckle as she acknowledged that Ed may be on par with Alexis, but she also stressed that she's pretty strong too, even though she doesn't look like it. Besides, she has a feeling that Ed's a good person, which was something he didn't expect to hear, leaving him shocked. Now that he thinks about it, Tia may always be friendly, but she doesn't always act like this, which makes him wonder if she also has memories from the past. It's not impossible, right? Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Gonzo and Alexis were also having a conversation much more important than the former, because here, the monk asked their leader if it was really a good idea to let Tia accompany him. Although he thinks Ed wouldn't pull anything, before he could voice his concern, Alexis cut him off and said that if it's what Tia wanted, then they should just leave it be. Moreover, Alexis says their elven friend would probably ignore them if he said something, commenting on how free-spirited she is while working furiously on repairing the table. Gonzo couldn't help but break out in laughter, knowing Tia was exactly as he said. Meanwhile, the old owner of the furniture Alexis broke tried to appeal to him, saying he didn't want to trouble the hero, but the latter took it the wrong way and asked if the old man was doubting his repair skills. Alexis assured the older man that he was doing this out of his own free will and highlighted the need to own up to your responsibilities, especially if you're the one who inconvenienced others. All that monologue only for Alexis to say how he's got quite the eye and skill for craftsmanship, marveling at the exquisite looking table he just repaired. Even the townsfolk agreed that the hero's taste was too special, just like his. While the rest of the townsfolk fawned over his handiwork, the hero told his older companion that they should go since there's something that's been bothering him. Back to Tia and Ed, the elven lady also asked the latter if something was bothering him. Well, it's not exactly bothering him, but he is wondering why Tia's already so comfortable with him, even though they just met. Furthermore, she seems to be going out of her way for him, and to that end, even Tia doesn't know the answer either. She tells him that she's experienced many things and at the same time has forgotten many more since elves like her have lived longer than humans. Heck, she's even over 100 years old. However, she also adds that their kind carve things they wish to remember deep in their souls. And even though they may not be as strong, these memories will persist through death and rebirth. This is why sometimes elves feel a sense of nostalgia when they meet a person or go to a place for the first time. And it's also how she felt when she met Ed a while ago. Hearing all that, Ed wonders if it's a case of deja vu and thinks that if it happened to elves, then there's a strong chance that it's not limited to her kind. He turns to her asking if she really believes in something like that, and Tia shyly admits that she also wondered if she and Ed had not only met somewhere before, but also shared a close bond. When he heard that, Ed could only smile, expressing how he wouldn't hold back and enjoy her company from now on as he continued to lead her through the maze and less discovered places in town. In his mind, Ed wondered if there really was a truth behind the concept of the soul and if it comes with you once you reincarnate. As he may not know if it's true or not, but given the fact that he's a person who gets reincarnated with full memories and all of his abilities with him, Ed thinks that the memories engraved in the soul must have started to awaken somewhere else in the world. The only question is how he could prove it. In time, Ed and Tia return to the inn, only to see a dramatic four-angel sculpture towering over the roof of the building. What in Michelangelo is this? Well, this was one of the roofs that got damaged by the Moonlight Sword, and Alexis told them that he already planned to fix it since it's been bothering him, but as expected, he's too special for this. So being special is Alexis's gag, huh? The townsfolk didn't seem to mind, just as he asked them what they did. But Tia went ahead singing praises of how amazing Ed was and proclaiming how they didn't seem to have any luggage. As soon as she did, Ed dumped the rations he bought for the party, explaining that 10 of those would be preserved for a year, while another batch of 10 would be preserved for the next 3 months. Keeping in mind how he heard from Tia that they're not leaving town for a while, which was why he only bought preserved rations. Forget about the rations, Gonzo's more interested in how he managed to put all those food packs in that small bag. Our boy simply told him that it was a magic tool that had a much larger capacity than it looked. But here's the catch, ever since he picked it up, Ed is the only one who could use it, which is obviously a lie given his situation. So, this bag, Ed says the bag turns into a regular one when it's touched by others, as currently evidenced by Tia's attempt to fit herself in it. In a very suggestive pose, if I may add. In his mind, Ed thought it was best to make everything about his tools rather than his skills, ultimately exiled from the hero's party. And the only reason the bag could work like that is because of his skill, Wanderer's Treasure Trove, and by putting the storage entrance at the front, he could make it look like a magic bag. Even he thinks Alexis wouldn't be able to see past this. As for Alexis, he asks how much Ed can store in that bag. And again, our boy lied, replying that he could fit probably 2 or 3 warehouses worth inside. But if we're talking about its real capacity, then he could probably fit a universe or 2 in there. Tia is so happy showing off Ed's accomplishments, but they soon proceed to the next object he bought, pulling it out of the bag and presenting them with another magical tool that creates water. Gonzo and Alexis were a lot less enthusiastic seeing this one, just as the hero asked Tia if she had already told Ed, which she affirms. Alexis tells them that they already have a method of acquiring water, and it's all thanks to Tia's spirit magic. But that's not all. Tia adds that Ed spent 50 silver coins to buy it, and it made Alexis ponder for a bit since it could have cost Ed at least 5 gold coins for it, much to Tia's shock. Price aside, Alexis turns to our boy, waiting for his reason for buying the item. Ed admits that they do have a method of acquiring water wherever they are. As long as they have magic, they can have water, which is practically the same as having access to water as long as they have Tia. However, Ed raises a valid point. If Tia gets sick or injured, then they won't be able to call the spirits for assistance, which Gonzo and Alexis realized just now. Alexis's brows furrowed as he realized how they got too dependent on a single person, which carries a higher risk. For him, he got too lenient because it was too convenient, which Tia low-key took as an insult, but they couldn't really focus on her now. With that, Alexis got up, saying he acknowledged Ed's skills. But it was Tia who was acting more smug. So just like that, Alexis kept his end of the deal and accepted Ed, welcoming him to the hero's party. But Gonzo, Tia, and Ed were already celebrating with a 3-way high five. The monk even grabbed Ed by the shoulder, suggesting that maybe our boy could fit a piece of adamantine in his bag for Gonzo's training, since he plans to build muscles as best as he can. Just then, Alexis noticed something protruding from Ed's bag and pulled it out, seeing how our boy had bought a sword for himself. Alexis thought that Ed would put more of their budget into buying a new sword for himself, then shoved it to the latter's chest, claiming that it didn't match his talent. The hero scoffed a little, asking if buying that cheap sword was a compromise Ed made as he shoved it into the latter's chest. Ed assured him that the sword was just a disposable one and was enough to get him to the next town, and upon hearing that, Alexis perked. So, our boy took this chance to raise a proposal. Apart from the proficiency he acquired throughout his travels, He also got his hands on some amazing treasures, which got Alexis more intrigued. Well, this is Ed's second chance after all, and he's 6 months ahead of everyone else. And then they were 4. And just like that, the hero's party found themselves on a carriage on the way to Atorumtine, a mining and forging town. Tia peers from the window, amazed at all the stacks of smoke coming out of them, asking aloud if they were all smithies and saying how there must be a lot of amazing weapons there. Alexis told her that's not usually the case. Soon they found themselves walking around town as they marveled at the surroundings, and Alexis explained that the main product they manufacture there is silverware. Upon hearing that, she asks if this was the treasure Ed was talking about, like maybe a knife that makes everything you eat delicious. Though Ed is quick to dismiss the idea, but it would be pretty cool if there was something like that. Their lot headed to an anvil-shaped structure called the Silver Stove, and as soon as they settled in, Alexis was quick to make Ed spill the beans. So Ed began saying how his plan is based on a piece of information from a reliable source. The mine they're in seems to have a den built by a rockworm in it. The 3 party members were shocked at the mention of the creature, and that's because rockworms devour anything and everything that has silver in it. During his first trip to this world, Ed discovered how these creatures leave giant crevices in their wake when they feed, which can lead to large-scale cave-ins. But that's not all. He knows that 3 months from now, the rockworm will cause a massive cave-in and kill many people, making them despair, and in turn, the town will fall into ruin. Back then, when their party arrived, they were already too late. Back to the present, Alexis says if that were really the case, then this would be an extreme situation, prompting him to ask Ed why he didn't notify the authorities. Because if it were true, then the knights should be deployed immediately. But in his mind, our boy believes they can prevent a disaster from happening. Focusing on the current, Ed says he's certain that the rockworm is here, even though he doesn't have any evidence. But more important than that, he says he wants to be the one to take down the creature since it is a silver-eating rockworm. Once he heard that, it finally dawned on Alexis that the treasure Ed mentioned was actually mithril, which our hero affirmed with a sly smile. Tia couldn't follow the conversation, so she asked Gonzo how rockworms and mithril were related. Just like her, the muscled monk has no idea, so he suggests she ask the two directly, which she hesitates to do since it is a serious conversation. But Alexis turned to them, asking if the two of them were familiar with mithril and its properties. Tia says she does, laying out what she knows about mithril. It conducts mana, can store mana in large quantities, and how it's quite a rare metal. She adds that it's pretty common for top-tier magical tools and weapons imbued with enchantments to be made out of mithril. And yeah, the way it sparkles is a plus for her as well. Hearing all that just made Alexis facepalm, so he turned to Ed, asking him to explain it to her. So our boy begins by saying that when silver is exposed to strong magic over an extended period, it turns to mithril. But even Tia understands that much, so it means the cave is overflowing with mana, right? Ed says no, asking her in turn why the rockworm would even be relevant if that were the case. This time she tells him that the mana comes from the nearby rockworm, which Ed says is half correct. In the end, he decides to give her a hint by asking what rockworms eat, what metal they mine, and where the mana that turns silver into mithril comes from. In the end, he explained that for silver to turn to mithril, it needs to be exposed continuously to strong mana with all those conditions in mind. The best place to make mithril would be the rockworm's stomach. In other words, mithril is actually the undigested excrement of rockworms. Hearing all that just made Tia remember what she said earlier about how pretty it was, and we could actually feel her world crumble through the screen. Back to more important matters, Alexis asked if Ed's plan was to take down the rockworm to obtain the mithril, but the thing he wonders is how he will use it. Ed smiled to himself before telling Alexis that he was going to prepare the best possible weapons for the hero's party with mithril. And then there's Tia, who's still in a state of shock after learning about what mithril really is. Soon enough, all the miners were told to leave the site. But just as they were leaving, there was one man who started hounding and telling them to return to the mine. That's when one of the men told him that the hero told them to evacuate, forbidding entry from the mine for the rest of the day. Furthermore, the hero says he will compensate them for any loss of income. Meanwhile, the hero's party is already well inside the cave, with Gonzo wondering if there really was a rockworm inside the cave, seeing how they're in too deep. Alexis comments that it may be because the worm's feeding ground is up ahead if they're taking into account Ed's information. Ed, on the other hand, is more concerned about Tia, asking if she is okay. The elven lady starts hitting him on the arm, calling him out for suggesting the method they're about to use now. Ed seems to be enjoying her reaction, just as she asks if they can just buy it instead. That's when Ed told her that they could buy mithril, but if they had a lot of money, the quality wouldn't be the same as the one they collected from a rockworm. Tia didn't understand what he meant by this, so it was Alexis who answered, explaining that when silver comes in contact with the potent stomach acid of a rockworm, it undergoes an impeccable refining process that leaves it devoid of any impurities. As a result, it alters the properties of the silver, ultimately giving birth to mithril. He also adds that with pure mithril, one can make exceedingly high quality weapons, which makes Tia lament how she's also siding with Ed. but in the hero's defense, he already has the holy sword with him. Turning to our boy Ed, Alexis asks if they're in the right direction, and the latter answers that they're progressing smoothly with the help of his Akashic compass. Gonzo looms over Ed, curious at how this magic compass conveniently points to legendary beasts, though he feels bad that only our boy could use it. Upon hearing that, our boy could only laugh as Ed told him that he was the only one who could use it because he was the one who found it, which made the former ask where these ruins where he found the magical tools were located. Ed only told him that it was a secret continuing on their mine exploration. As he said so, before long, our boy suddenly stopped and told them that they were already at the place, though Tia didn't get what he said since they were currently standing in front of a dead end, making her wonder if the rockworm was on the other side of the wall. Gonzo's voice sounded behind her, saying they just needed to dig until they reached the monster, all hyped up as he announced that it was time for his muscles to shine. But before the monk could even do anything, Ed told him that he needed to put his bodybuilding exhibition on hold since there was no need to do so, and that our boy got it covered. Ed walked forward and started kicking the wall with his foot, activating his exile skill, Circular Reflector, as he did, much to the shock of the other three. Gonzo told him to stop since he might break his foot, but our boy told him that he was all good and was still going against the wall. If anything, he seems to be enjoying this since the skill stores impact, takes away the shockwaves from his foot, gathers them up more each time, and channels them into a strike all at once. Meanwhile, at the back, Tia turns to Alexis, asking him if he could stop Ed, but the latter says they should wait and see. Soon enough, the ground started to rumble, with Ed telling them to prepare for battle and the rockworm finally emerging, ready to devour them. Gonzo was quick enough to block the creature's attack, with the monk signaling for the rest of the crew to move out. Ed and Alexis dashed out of harm's way just as Tia started her enchantment to summon the spirit's help. Ed and Alexis stabbed the rockworm, but their attacks were futile given how thick its hide was, while Tia unleashed her skill, Volcanic Lance, and fired it straight at the rockworm. There was an explosion as the monster's mouth started burning. Hurt by Tia's attack, it started to scurry upward, but not before Gonzo told them that it was trying to escape through the roof. Suddenly, Ed appeared from above, right on top of the monster, and before they could do anything else, the rockworm devoured our boy. Tia calls out to him, not knowing that Ed's unscathed inside the belly of the beast. While touching the tip of his blade, he unleashed Exiled Skill, Blood Blade Tempering, intent on gutting the rockworm from the inside. Outside, Tia's too shocked at what she just witnessed, while half of the rockworm's body is still suspended in the air. She cries out to Gonzo to help her save Ed, but before the monk can do anything, blood starts to splutter from the inside. Ed comes hurrying out of there, complaining how fishy it was, covered with the monster's guts, leaving Gonzo shocked. Alexis gave a small smile, somewhat expecting that Ed was alright, since he voluntarily let himself get eaten. But for our boy, he could still only complain about how stinky it was when suddenly, Tia ran straight into his chest, blood and all. The elven lady was worried for him, asking if he was not hurt, but Ed assured him that he was alright. That's when Tia suddenly called him out, tears streaming down her face as she asked why he would do something reckless like that. Seeing her all worked up like that got Ed flustered, assuring her that he was really okay, and explaining that if he didn't do that, the monster would escape. That's when he remembered that Tia also got worried like this the first time around, so he apologized for making her worry. And this time he told her that he figured he needed to do something and believed that he could do it. Looking at her like this, he's again reminded that she hasn't changed from before. She is Tia after all. Ed also tells her that he doesn't want their efforts to go to waste, and in the end, Tia lets it go, pouting as she says so. Now that it's all sorted out, Ed presents them with his loot, a chunk of pure mithril. Even though she finally knew what it was, Tia's still awed by how sparkly it was, along with Alexis and Gonzo. However, Gonzo's a bit skeptical that it only amounted to that much from such a large worm, but Alexis tells them that it's plenty enough. What's more, Alexis said this was the first time he had ever seen such a large chunk of pure mithril. This finally made the two realize just how valuable the mithril was, with Tia asking how much it could be worth if Alexis had never seen one like this. After pondering for a bit, the people's hero told them that this chunk of mithril is enough to buy a castle because it's extremely one of a kind and is considered a rare item. With that said, Alexis adds that only the very best blacksmith could make do with this. But Gonzo and Tia were no longer listening to him, thinking about how priceless this item was. Even Gonzo's fumbling at how many strength training tools he could buy with that, until Alexis told the two to get a hold of themselves. Turning to our boy, Alexis says that now that they've acquired the mithril, he asks if Ed has a smith in mind who would work on the mithril. Well, now that Alexis asked, Ed said he was planning on forging it himself since he's a pretty decent blacksmith, which left the former's mouth hanging. He's a porter combatant and he's a what now? With that, the hero's party went back to Silverforge, where Alexis rented a blacksmith's workplace so Ed could work on the mithril. As soon as our boy walked in, he got all giddy admiring the furnace and tools he could use, as he asked the place's owner if he could really use them. The latter answers that he's free to do so, considering how the hero's party saved the town. If anything, they could use it for free. But Alexis refused since it would be rude to take advantage of him. Hearing the hero say that made the owner all the more grateful, but Alexis was already onto Ed, telling him that he could start working now that the place is all prepared, but warns him that if he does it half-heartedly, then all of their efforts will be wasted. Leaning closer to Ed, he asks if he's prepared himself properly, which the latter says he does, smiling at the hero in reply. Satisfied with his answer, Alexis told Gonzo and Tia that they should go, but their elven lady stayed behind, admiring Ed from her seat. So before Alexis walked out the door, he commented on how she had taken quite an interest in him, and even though he knew she was a good judge of character, he couldn't help but remark how she was too fond of Ed. Even though she doesn't seem to understand why she's acting like this, Alexis only gave her a smile. Alexis and Gonzo went to the nearest pub, with the latter asking if he was really in a position to ask Tia a question like that, when it's pretty obvious that the hero himself is pretty fond of Ed. Gonzo points out that it's the reason why he trusted the newcomer kid to lead them to a Torrentine, and it's also why he entrusted Ed with all of this, which is new since the monk knows Alexis doesn't trust other people very much. The hero was quiet for a moment before he told Gonzo how he's been observing Ed closely since he joined, and in addition to being a skilled swordsman like him, he goes on about how Ed uses mysterious magical artifacts that only he could use. Plus, there's also the fact that Ed seems to have an invaluable source of information, not just about the monsters but also how to handle them, which makes it all the more impressive for Alexis. So yes, he admits that he may be a little fond of Ed, making Gonzo burst out laughing, already aware of how the hero was. Back to Ed, he tells Tia that he's fine by himself, asking if she wouldn't be bored watching blacksmithing. Tia giggled, clarifying that she was there to watch him and not to forge, which caught our boy off guard. Does that mean she was always watching him? She didn't really deny it and told him that it was because she felt he could do anything. As soon as she said that, the image of Tia from his previous life flashed in his mind, making our boy look grim as he told her that there were a lot of things he couldn't do. Staring at his hand with a defeated look, he told her how time and time again, he let the most precious things slip through his fingers, no matter how simple they should have been to hold on to. Ed then proceeded to work quietly, vowing to himself that he wouldn't make the same mistake again. This time, he'll make sure that things end differently with his second chance, using the skills he acquired with his own two hands. Ed starts to work on the mithril while thinking about how he'll make his own future, and making sure to change the ending. With his hands, he vows to make a weapon to change fate. Somewhere else, a floating eye welcomes a man with his back turned away from the camera and calls him Cyan. Finally, we got a new face! This floating eye reports how the hero came and defeated the rockworm, while Cyan notices how the body is still stiff. Well, not that it matters because this man, Cyan, has a grim look on his face as he says it will be a pain to deal with them. Fortunately, he says he's the one in charge of recon this time, and more than everything else, he has to report this to the Demon Lord. This time, we open with a flashback of Ed carrying Tia on her back on the way to where the hero died. While running, he asks her what kind of person the porter they hired was like, and for a moment, Tia tries to remember the man. She recalled that he looked just like any normal guy, but he did have a pretty distinct nose. As for his name, it was redacted, and that's when Tia wakes up. Still feeling dazed, the elven lady kept having the same dream again about her and Ed living a different life and walking on a different path. In her mind, she wondered why she keeps having the same dream, even though she just met Ed. Speaking of Ed, our boy turns to her to ask if he woke her up, but Tia says she just dozed off on her own. This time, Ed suggests that she go to bed so she can rest properly, but in her mind, all Tia could think about was how Ed burst into tears as soon as he saw her face. Unknown to him, she considers their meeting a heartbreaking moment as well, but now all she can think about is that being here with him feels warm. Tia turns down Ed's suggestion, saying she wants to watch him a little more, so he decides to continue with forging. Just then, he thought about having a little water break now that he was all sweaty, but suddenly he was reminded of something and held himself back. Ed just remembered that he couldn't take all the treasures and travel footprints he had accumulated over the past 100 years. This is the very reason why he had to rebuild his sword in the first place, but at least the abilities and memories remained nonetheless. Just then, he conjured the Akashic compass and saw that it pointed towards something on the west, making Ed pull a grim face. Just outside their workplace, Cyan and the snitch-looking eye observe our hero from afar, sizing him up as the human who is the cause of anomalies and disturbances within the hero's party. According to Cyan's intel, this human is supposed to be a porter, yet for some reason, he's actually forging. His actions are just way too inconsistent. Meanwhile, the flying eye keeps on telling him that they should kill Ed, but Cyan decides that he'll keep an eye on him for a little bit longer. With that said, he got up somewhat complaining about how he can take on a human form. It's always the same face and body. It's like he has no control over it. But can you even consider that an ability when you can't change your human form? With that said, he had to be extra careful because if his cover was blown, then it would pose a threat to their future activities. Upon hearing that, the floating eyeball teases him at his inability to change his looks when suddenly, Cyan turns to him more seriously and starts to change while saying he should show more respect since his rank is higher than the eyeball. Soon, Cyan's body morphs into a shadow lizard, and he tells the other creature to wait for him as he gathers more information on what to report to the Demon King. The next day, the sun was already high in the sky when Alexis and Gonzo came back to ask Ed if he'd finished forging the weapons out of mithril. The buff monk was pretty shocked at how he was able to finish all that, but in his defense, Ed was busy working on the weapons if he wasn't eating or sleeping. Alexis, on the other hand, only narrowed his eyes, asking our boy if that was enough to impress him. It's safe to say that Ed's pretty confident that he made the ultimate weapon. A pretty bold claim, but knowing what he's been through, I'd say that's true. His reply only made Gonzo all the more excited, but Ed had to stop him since they needed a place where he could show it off first. To do that, he showed off his Akashic compass, prompting Tia to ask what he was going to do with that. That's when Ed started to let them in on his plans. As the heroes' party convened, Cyan continued to spy on them from afar, trying to catch a glimpse of the new pieces of equipment Ed had made. From where he was standing, he could deduce a sword, a gauntlet, and a silver staff. Seeing all those from afar, Cyan couldn't help but be curious about these new weapons made out of mithril. In his mind, none of these pose a threat except for Alexis's holy sword, but somehow he's got this uneasy feeling in his gut. In the end, he decided to do further recon when suddenly, he saw Ed was already looking at him. We all know that look. This dude is about to get screwed. Big time. Cyan was taken aback and quickly hid behind one of the pillars in the building. He asked aloud if he was really spotted or if it could have just been a coincidence. But rather than wait things out, he decides to shapeshift into a shadow bat and fly off to report this incident to the Demon King. He was already in a panic, thinking about how there was something off about the new guy. For starters, even the hero couldn't sense him, so how could this new party member? In addition to that, there's also the look in his eyes, as if he's looking at his prey. In his mind, Cyan denies this, as he tells himself that it's the other way around, and that it's just not possible. He was so wrapped up in his thoughts that he didn't sense the incoming ice blades that were fired from below, piercing through his wings. Cyan crashes back to the ground and is just starting to process that he has been hit with an ice arrow made of spirit magic. But that would be impossible, especially if it came from that distance. Suddenly, a pair of feet appeared in front of him, followed by a voice that called him General, and explained how he had always wanted to meet Cyan, but never expected to see him so soon. Ed squats right in front of a fallen Cyan, even calling out his name, much to the latter's surprise. How did this new guy know his name? But Ed already caught himself, asking if the shapeshifter's name was supposed to be a secret, and apologized for his slip-up. Not that any of that matters, because right now, Ed's got a delirious look in his eyes as he tells Cyan that there's no point in keeping quiet. Cyan was about to deny all of this when suddenly, Gonzo and Tia appeared, asking Ed how things went. As for our boy, he praised Tia for her perfect shot, impressed at how she was able to hit their target from that far away. While 3/4 of the heroes' party were busy chatting away, a million thoughts were running through Cyan's mind. Just what is this guy, and how'd they manage to shoot him from that distance? But more important than that, does it mean that he's actually the one being watched this whole time instead of the other way around? Gonzo looks down on Cyan, confirming with Ed if the creature on the ground is indeed a demon scout, which our boy affirms, adding that doing recon is essential for the enemy after all. Tia also joins in, leaning down as she asks Ed what they plan to do next when Cyan suddenly shapeshifts into a human and tells them that he's actually an envoy of the Demon King, while still on his knees. Yeah, envoy our butt. Noticing that the hero Alexis is nowhere to be seen, Cyan tells them that he has a message for the former. He begins by saying that the Demon King has a proposal for a better future together. But Ed quickly cuts him off and says that the hero isn't coming. What's more, Ed says Alexis is giving them a chance to show off while the latter is busy evacuating the residents of the area. Now, hero business aside, our boy couldn't help but brush aside what Cyan was saying about the future, sarcastically saying how he finds it so funny that it brought tears to his eyes. With a determined look, Ed tells the latter how he intends to crush the future they dreamed of right here and now. His proclamation elicited a laugh from Cyan, who couldn't help but cackle at the idea that Ed is the one who intends to do it. Pretty big words for a lowly human, as he said. As he did so, Cyan started to transform, taking the chance to eliminate them, especially since the hero wasn't there to carry them all. Right before their very eyes, Cyan's voice not only grew, but his body as well, scoffing at how Ed looked down on him. Finally, his true form, a roach-looking creature, reveals itself and towers over the three heroes. Tia and Gonzo are both on guard, while Ed looks annoyed at how Alexis chose the right job doing evacuation duty right now. Just then, Cyan attacks them with his claws, intending to crush them as a loud crash echoes in the area. Gonzo activated his aura shield, while Tia and Ed managed to evade the attack. Cyan continues his rage monologue, expressing how much he hates Ed, especially since he made him reveal the former's violent appearance. This time, the creature readies himself to fire an attack, proclaiming that he won't stop until the town is reduced to dust. There was a flash of bright light as Cyan unleashed his attack, making Ed call out to Gonzo, asking if the old man would be alright using the gauntlet like that. The latter assures that he is, activating his aura shield again, and before Cyan's attack could hit town, it was deflected thanks to the barrier Gonzo put up. The creature almost lost it, finding it impossible how Gonzo managed to produce a barrier big enough to cover the whole town. His intel said that a magnitude of this scale should be impossible, but 3 of our heroes stood unscathed, with Gonzo lowering his stance and showing off his new gauntlet. Alexis stands in one of the higher buildings, observing the fight from afar. He wonders if a new weapon can really make that much of a difference. This just makes him wonder who Ed really is. Earlier, he recalled how our boy handed Gonzo a pair of gauntlets, instructing the old man to concentrate his mana on his fists. Back to the present, Cyan lunged towards Gonzo with his claws, looking down on their lot for being mere humans. But the latter was already in position, channeling all his mana into his fists, then proceeded to unleash it all at once. The result is Gonzo obliterating the whole of Cyan's right arm, leaving the villain speechless once again. On the other side, even Tia is amazed at how the creature's body part exploded, while Gonzo is feeling giddy and singing praises towards Ed for being the best. For the first time, Cyan realized that he was actually facing pretty strong opponents. Way too strong. And what's even more shocking is that they were already at this level even without the hero among them. Meanwhile, there's Gonzo, who fully believes that his muscles have finally reached the point of explosion and is about to execute another move. But all Cyan could wonder about is why all of this is happening. Was this all because of Ed? This piece of urgent information must be reported with great haste, so this time Cyan decided to make a flashy exit that made Gonzo think he had blown himself up. But Ed knew better, aware that Cyan had just used the explosion as a distraction and burrowed underground. Our boy assumed Cyan had shapeshifted and ran away, which was true because now the latter is burrowing further underground as a rockworm, thinking that the hero's party can't chase him. Before he realized what was happening, a stone figure grabbed Cyan in his rockworm form, pulling him from underground and caging him in a tight embrace. This was Tia's technique, Rockbind, which was amplified thanks to the mithril sword Ed forged for her. He explained that by infusing spirit magic into the sword's blade, Tia could give it a special attribute and unleash that element through a slash. Now back to the present, Gonzo's all fired up, surprised that Tia was capable of using such a powerful technique, but the latter clarifies that what she just did was a simple spell to trap enemies in stone. However, it has become quite powerful thanks to the sword that Ed made. Cyan, on the other hand, remains trapped in a rock figure's embrace as Ed slowly approached him, holding the staff lightly. Our boy has an unreadable expression on his face, telling the villain how he knows what the latter is about to do next and continuing how his regret lingers on. What's more, he tells Cyan that he won't forget even if he dies and gets reborn again, leaving the former confused. Ed tells him that it's okay if he doesn't understand and simply says that it's his atonement, which further enrages the rockworm, asking our boy where someone like him even came from in the first place. With the memory of Tia's peaceful face as she died flashing on Ed's head, he revealed to Cyan that he came from that future. With that said, our boy finally unleashed his deadly technique, Silver-Winged Sword, Unfold in 12. Multiple slashes cuts through Cyan's gigantic body, and it was over as soon as it began. The wings on Ed's staff molded back to their previous form, and with that, the finishing blow was done. Ed looked to the sky and down on his clutched fist, wondering if it was over when Alexis, Tia, and Gonzo came running, worried about him. Seeing them rush toward him made Ed smile and say to them that it was over, bragging about his new sword and swordsmanship, which made both Tia and Gonzo call him out for his smugness. The two approached the rockworm's body, with Tia wondering if it was really unhurt since it didn't look like it when Alexis told her to look closer. The main hero started to point out how the cut was nearly invisible, not to mention the fact that the surface of the cut was also frighteningly smooth. From the looks of it, Alexis assumed that Cyan died without even realizing he was cut, before turning to Ed and saying that one cannot simply do something like this unless they're a good swordsman with a good sword. Hearing Alexis say all that got Ed a little shy, trying to brush off the compliment as he said that what he did was just a makeshift solution. Just then, Alexis's voice turned more serious as he reminded our boy that he's the hero and that it's a title that's not only for show. As far as he knows, there's not a single craftsman capable of creating weapons comparable to the ones Ed just did, and yet our boy only called it a makeshift solution. So what more could the real deal do? Finally, Alexis asked him the million-dollar question. Who was Ed really and what was he hiding? Alexis is the hero of the story. He's chosen by the Holy Sword and is deemed as humanity's only hope of defeating the Demon King. And as such, there are times when one's stature may lead to arrogance and cold-bloodedness. Right now, Alexis looks down on our boy with that piercing gaze, and if Ed was being honest, that look doesn't really suit the hero. This magnetic force of a man just asked our boy if he was hiding something, which made Ed falter a bit. Did he go a bit too far this time? So he tried to play it cool, obviously caught off guard by such a bold question. Alexis points to Ed's sword, saying how its appearance is deceptive and how it seems much more than a simple mithril staff. Even though he doesn't know the inner workings of the staff, Alexis believes that the tool could change its shape to form an insanely sharp blade. There was a moment of silence before our boy affirmed that it was exactly as Alexis had said. The mithril forms wings on one side while the other side shapes into an incredibly sharp blade that reaches its sharpest when it has 12 wings. Ed says that's pretty much all there is to it because it extends even further. Then the blade would shatter at the slightest impact. In his mind, Ed didn't let Alexis know the truth of the matter, and it's that the blade doesn't transform with magic. Rather, it dies because of using the exiled skill, Mastersmith. With all that said, Ed praises the hero for his sharp eyes, impressed at how Alexis was able to figure it all out just by seeing it once. However, there's something else that the latter is contemplating, so he decides to rephrase his question to Ed. What heights does he aim to achieve as a blacksmith? Oh, so that's what he meant. Our boy was pretty sure he revealed himself, so his cover's still good, no? Ed decided to run with the idea that he just wanted to make a sword that could cut through anything, but Alexis cut him off, remarking how it was a typical goal when he knew very well that Ed could actually make a sword like that. This time, Tia chimed in asking what made the hero think that, and Alexis was quick to oblige. He pointed out how Ed said that his sword was a makeshift solution and not a work in progress, or experiment. This meant that Ed could have made something even more amazed if he was under the right conditions, but at the same time it begs the question, why was Ed in a hurry? He did say he was making the best sword in the world, or maybe there was something else like a lack of materials or equipment. At Alexis's question, our boy revealed that his biggest limitation was the material, not bothering to add that making a sword of that caliber under these circumstances is impossible. He also reasoned that he couldn't just buy more of the materials he needed, which is why he had to be careful. But the truth is that the things Ed needed came from other worlds. Alexis only hummed and settled for Ed's answer for now, as he told them that they needed to head back and clean up the mess they had made. Besides, they also have a city wall they need to fix ASAP, so it should be easy peasy if Alexis is the one to do the job. But before he could take a step further, Tia held him back and said that she and Gonzo would be the ones to handle the wall. Her eyes narrowed toward him, which made the hero question her actions. Rather than answer him, Tia and Gonzo made a run for it, leaving Ed alone with Alexis. Just as our boy was about to head out, Alexis suddenly patted him on the shoulder and said he had a special request for Ed. He wanted our boy to come to his room because there was something he needed to discuss with him. Now that was enough to make Ed panic and be portrayed as literally out of character. On the other hand, Tia busies herself fixing the town walls with one of her skills, the hand, which is literally a large pair of earthen hands that she used to carry a large boulder. Just then, the townsfolk spotted her, singing praise while Tia bowed her head in apology for making a hole in the town wall. They assured her that it was no problem while also fawning over Tia as they continued to express their gratitude. She was about to brush it off, claiming it was only natural to help when suddenly, the chorus of praises began to change and tell her how the Demon Lord doesn't stand a chance against them. Just like that, she feels the pressure of the responsibility again. But she can only smile and assure them that they will be the ones to bring peace to the world. Since you can't beat him, you might as well join him, which is exactly what Tia did, joining in on the town's support for them as they continued to place their expectations on their party. Gonzo joins in with a laugh, his voice booming over everyone else as he proclaims that a rabble like this isn't worthy of facing him in front of his mighty muscles. As if to prove a point, he even carries a boulder over his head as a display of strength, leaving the townsfolk in awe as the muscled monk continues that it will be the same once he meets the Demon Lord. Gonzo proceeded to drop the giant boulder off his shoulder while the people gawked at how he was the most reliable when it came to the embodiment of muscles. He approaches Tia and pats her on the head, assuring the elven lady that everything will be okay. He also said that it's normal that people's expectations of them grow the more they accomplish, and this was part of the hero's burden. With that said, Gonzo urges her to let loose a bit and that there is no need for her to act strong whenever she's with him. Besides, the monk adds that they've become a much stronger party since Ed joined. With a determined look on his face, he told Tia that they would defeat the Demon Lord. Hearing him say that comforted Tia, thanking her companion for what he had just done, but it just reminded him where the other two were right now. But before they could defeat the Demon Lord, our homeboy needs to defeat his own nerves first. Right now, he's on the edge of his seat, anxious about what Alexis could possibly want with him. The main hero gave him black tea, explaining that he had to make it the same as what they had in the inn, even if he wasn't sure it was to Ed's taste. But Ed assures him it's alright, all while our boy kept thinking that being taken care of by Alexis like this feels like he's going to take care of him. If you know, you know. This is even more nerve-wracking for Ed because Alexis took the trouble of bringing him up to his room and treating him politely to boot. In the end, Ed just decided to ask what the other man wanted from him, assuming the worst and thinking that he'd be exiled all over again, when Alexis told him that he wanted our boy to take a look at this, the Holy Sword. Ed's a bit shocked that the hero is actually handing him his weapon, and even more so when the latter tells him that he doesn't mind if Ed draws it. Our boy does as Alexis says, all while thinking this was the very first time he got to hold the weapon, considering he has seen it a number of times in battle. It's not as if he could touch it freely since the hero hated it when someone else touched the weapon. Upon drawing the sword, Ed was about to ask something but cut himself off just as Alexis asked what he thought. For one, it's what Ed expected of the holy sword, an impressive blade. But Alexis cut him off to ask if the blade deserved to be called an incredible sword. Our boy fumbled for a bit since in his mind, he admitted that it was indeed a blade forged with top-notch techniques, and there was no way he could make something similar to this with his basic skills. Alexis then sighed because even Ed became aware that it was not the holy sword. Sure, it may be the ultimate weapon crafted by human hands, but it's still just an imitation. In his mind, Ed thought that if he went all out with his mastersmith, making a similar blade might just be possible, but in the end, it couldn't be considered the holy sword. Now, he turns to Alexis, asking where the real holy sword is, and that's when the main hero looks away and replies that he doesn't know. They did everything in their power to try to find it, dispatching survey teams to all corners of the world to try to find it, but to no luck. Upon hearing that, Ed realized that the sword was just a substitute for the real thing, until the real holy sword was found. Alexis said that if the Demon Lord were to discover that this was a fake, then they would exhaust all means to find the real one first. Once they do manage to find it, then humanity would lose its only chance at victory. Alexis adds that for so long, he's been deceiving everyone with the skills, but even he can sense that the sword is reaching its limit. Moreover, there's no one left who can forge a sword of this caliber. That is until Ed came along because Alexis instantly knew that Ed could make an even more powerful sword than the one he had. Ed was silent, contemplating for a bit. If he used everything he learned from his first time in this world and all his exiled skills, he could probably have made a better sword than this. However, it would still be a fake and could never compare to the real one. He begins telling Alexis that he's flattered that the latter would put that much trust in him and is about to turn him down when suddenly Alexis bows his head to him. The arrogant Alexis actually lowered his head. This was enough to shock Ed, but the main hero continued that he'll give anything he wants, whatever materials or equipment he needs, just so Ed could forge him a sword so that he could continue being the hero. Ed tells him to stop and that he shouldn't bow his head to someone like him, but Alexis replies that he will bow his head as many times as he needs because as the hero, he bears the future of every single person on his shoulders. With that said, his failures become humanity's failures, so he must not falter. He must remain the beacon of hope. Seeing Alexis like this only made our boy ask why he was willing to go that far, pointing out how he wasn't given a choice to be a hero. It was forced upon him. To them, Alexis is nothing but a sacrifice meant to bear the burden and fight in their stead, which Ed knows Alexis is already aware of, so why was he still doing it? In reply, Alexis told him that it's because he's special. He can acquire anything he wants, and if he wishes for it, he can make anything happen, no matter how unreasonable it is. He believes that is his purpose, to exist to give hope for peace in the future. With that said, he must make their hopes come true. So by Ed's hand, he asks our boy to allow him to keep being their hero. So it's like that, huh? Alexis is noble and proud, not because he knows he's special, but because he needs to prove himself worthy of it. He looks down on others because he knows his special needs, and in his mind, Ed admits that he misjudged him. Ed tells him that he understands, however, that his work is not worth a hero and instead shows Alexis the Akashic compass, saying he'd like to find the true holy sword. Upon hearing what he said, Alexis raised his head a little to ask if the compass was not just a tool for locating magical beasts, and to that, our boy apologized for lying. In his defense, Alexis was already aware that Ed had a few secrets after all. In his mind, if the Akashic compass's true functions were discovered, then it would make it much harder to get exiled later. However, if he doesn't respond to the hero's level of determination, then just what kind of man would that make him? As the Akashic compass points towards Ed's north, our boy offers his services to help find the holy sword, and the price for such services is defeating the Demon Lord and bringing peace to the world. Upon hearing that, Alexis finally smiled and commented on how Ed never ceased to amaze him. Alexis looked at him straight in the eye and said that he was willing to pay the price as he asked Ed to lead him to where the holy sword was. Ed bows in return, calling him Hiro-sama, but the latter corrected him, telling him to call him Alexis. Moreover, the latter says that he has no intention of treating the person he has bowed his head to as a simple luggage carrier. Just like Gonzo and Tia, Alexis proclaims Ed as one of the hero's true party members, so he's allowed to call him by his name. This time, it was Ed's turn to get surprised as he smiled and called Alexis by his name before shaking hands, because finally, he became a true equal member of the hero's family. Just like that, the town wall was already fixed in just a day. The townsfolk stood in front of it, admiring the elven lady's work, even though it was just a simple renovation. They still found it amazing, and even more so since it's been repaired using spirit magic, so it looks stronger than before. Just then, the hero's party walks by, and they are quick to call out to Tia, saying she's welcome to stay much longer. but the latter tells them they need to leave since they know their next destination. At the very least, the townsfolk told her to at least accept their heartfelt gratitude for what they'd done to them, showcasing a statue that they erected in her honor. As if that wasn't tacky enough, they just had it built right next to her rockbind figure hugging the rockworm. Tia could only stare at it blankly, while Gonzo and Ed did their best to suppress their laughter. One of the people even told her that he'd never forget the things she did, though he wasn't there when it happened. But hey, it's the thought that counts, right? As for Tia, she points out that Gonzo was there too, so why did they only erect her statue? Meanwhile, Alexis observes the statue and notes how it feels somewhat lacking, so he suggests they illuminate it with rainbow lights from below, making it even tackier, much to Tia's embarrassment. Then he turns to Ed, telling our boy to lead the way, and with that, the heroes' party sets out for their new goal, which is to search for the true holy sword. Now the thing about the Akashic compass is that it only tells them the direction of their destination, not the distance, meaning this journey would not be a simple one. In the end, they can only trust where the compass points and head straight to where it's at. It doesn't matter if they have to go through towering mountains, deep forests, bogs, or any other treacherous landscapes. They followed the compass through a cave, but it was just a dead end, so they pressed further. As taxing as it was, Ed always wanted to go on an adventure like this since it was nice seeing some of the scenery he missed the first time he was around here. All in all, it took them 3 whole months before they reached their destination. They arrived at a misty forest hidden between the mountains, beyond the northern reaches of a frontier country. The heroes' party had been walking around for a while when Gonzo spoke up and asked if they were heading in the right direction, because the monk was pretty sure they had passed by this area already. Ed assures him that they're on the right path, and asks Tia if she can locate where the mist is coming from, since it can't be blown away no matter what they do. The elven lady did so and revealed that the whole forest was under the influence of powerful illusionary magic. If they aren't careful when undoing the spell, then a new spell will take place. Moreover, she points out that there's something strange about the movement of mana, since it seems to be reacting to something. Tia tells them that if what they're searching for is really there, then it could be so because Alexis is there with them. The 3 men exchanged looks while Alexis finally smiled because it looked like they finally made it to the right place this time. Gonzo shares his good food, though he warns the hero not to let his guard down considering what happened. To them last month, even Tia still wallows over whatever the heck happened to them in that cave. But all of Ed's focus was right in front of him as they approached a patterned open ground with stone golems, swords at hand, standing on each side. At the very center of the open ground is a pool of water, and right in the middle of it, the very weapon they were looking for is half buried in the ground. Ed was about to ask if that was the holy sword when the hero recited an adage. Deep in the hidden forest, at the innermost of a spring, rests the hero's strength. Now that he's here, Alexis realizes that the hero had to journey in person to find the holy sword, which explains why no one was able to find it until now. Tia and Gonzo offered their support to their comrade, patting him on the back as they urged him to pull it out, while Alexis turned to Ed to thank him. After all, they couldn't have made it here without him. Ed only smiled back and reminded him that they made a promise after all, urging Alexis to pull the sword out, but now that they're here, he wants Ed to try and pull it. Who knows what might happen? This just left our protagonist feeling a little puzzled, but that's when Alexis tells him that if only the true hero can draw the holy sword, then wouldn't that make Ed the true hero if he draws it? It's safe to say Ed didn't back down from that offer, so seeing there's no second chance after this, in turn hyped Gonzo and Tia to try pulling it too. Ed grabs the handle and tries pulling it with all his might, but the sword won't budge, not even a little. He even planned to stuff the whole platform into a stranger box, but that wouldn't count. So up next, Gonzo happily walked over to where the sword was. Like Ed, he tried to pull the sword with everything he had, refusing to let his muscles cave into something like this, but he too was a failure. So now it's finally Tia's turn, but even she wasn't able to pull it off, which was something Alexis had already somewhat expected. Finally, it was Alexis' turn to have a go and have his King Arthur moment. Alexis touched the tip of the handle, making the 3 restless from all the suspense. Gonzo's fairly surprised to see the hero get nervous like this, but they have confidence that if it's him, he can draw it. At that, Alexis tried to pull it out, and the 3 got all excited to see the sword move a bit as they started cheering him on to pull harder. All their cheering got him annoyed because wasn't this a historical moment for the hero? Suddenly, he hears a voice asking who dared to lay his hand on the sword and if he was a true hero. Before he realizes it, Alexis is transported back to the castle, right into the day he was born. He could see his mother holding him and naming him Alexis. She's cradled him as she smiles, saying that one day everyone will know his name because he's her precious child after all. In real time, Alexis stood motionless in front of the sword, making the 3 start to worry about him because he hasn't moved since he touched the sword. Ed starts walking toward him, asking if he's alright when he suddenly feels an incoming attack. Thank God for his quick reflexes, because Ed managed to evade a stone hand smashing where he stood. Ed jumped back to where Gonzo and Tia stood, just as the monk asked if they had walked into a trap because the golem started moving. Our boy tries calling out to Alexis to get a hold of himself, but Tia says it's useless because there's strong magic at work. From the looks of it, Alexis's consciousness had been whisked away somewhere, so these golems are here to make sure they don't interrupt the hero's trial. Back to Alexis, he watches his younger self ask his mother to read a book for him, making his mother giggle at his excitement. The younger Alexis excitedly tells his mother how he loves the story about the hero defeating the Demon King and saving the world. He even tells her that he'll be a hero like the legends one day too. The hero smiled at the memory, but just as quickly, the scenery faded and changed into a memory of him standing right in front of his mother's casket. Ever since then, the young Alexis had worked hard and trained constantly to become the hero she saw in him, to be special like she said he was. But when he first met Gonzo, the latter made him realize that he wasn't special. Alexis tried taking down Gonzo, but the monk easily blocked his attacks, reminding the former that he was just a boy. Gonzo in real time is busy fighting the golems off along with Tia and Ed. Even with all these muscles, he had to admit that the golems had such toughness and power in them. Tia suggests they target the magic that's making the golems move since physical attacks don't have any effects on them, pushing the responsibility to Ed so they can take care of Alexis. Ed quickly catches on and slashes the golem's shin while Tia strikes it in the chest. While all of this ruckus is going on, Alexis remains motionless in the middle, just as Gonzo shouts at him, asking how long he plans to space out. Back to Alexis's hero trial. This time he was shown the memory of the day his younger self finally beat Gonzo. He thought about how he refused to give up on becoming a hero, even though the monk reminded him that he was just a boy. He's not really sure if it's delusion, nostalgia, or simply his stubborn desire to prove his point by pressing forward, but it didn't take long for him to reach his goal. Finally, the day came when Alexis was crowned the hero, signaling the final day that humanity would live under the threat of the Demon Lord. Alexis kneels to receive the hero title, but in his mind he wonders if this is what he really wishes for. Soon enough, he meets Tia, praising the talented mage for her power and asking her to join him, because to continue being a hero, he needed to gather companions. But the thing is, not everyone could keep up with him. Just then, Alexis is shown a different scene, the one wherein he tells Tia that she made a whole elaborate plan to get rid of the hindrance. It was the memory from his previous life. Tia tells him that if she doesn't do at least that much, then Ed would have followed her, and she can't protect him anymore. By now, Alexis grows more confused seeing this vision of him and Tia talking about Ed and how she wants Ed to live and see the world in peace. By now, Alexis is frantic, asking why he was seeing something like that, something that never happened, and why he was being shown all these when the voice sounded again. It told him that it was not an illusion but a potential future that occurred long ago, and that these memories existed. This time it showed Alexis the final battle when they reached the demon realm, with Tia and Gonzo fighting for their lives. The voice told him that despite being loved by the people, the promises of a hero who never proved himself went unfulfilled, and in the end, nothing remained. Alexis clicked his tongue and tried to pull the sword, but he couldn't do so while the voice asked if a person like him really considered himself a hero. It went around asking him if he truly believed that he was worthy of being a hero, because a hero is someone who gives everything to save the world. Alexis, on the other hand, was too stubborn. The voice said it added that he would rather rot away in his own stubbornness than dedicate himself to his duty. All that lies ahead of him is the conclusion of the hero's charade and the end of the human world, just as his vision showed Alexis from before, handing Tia the teleportation crystal. On the outside, the three are still busy fighting off the golems when finally, the biggest one of them all stirs to life and approaches the motionless Alexis. The voice asks him again if he is truly a hero, and this time Alexis replies that he has no way of knowing if he is a hero just because he is called one. Maybe he thought he was special just because others around him started calling him as such, so he went along for the ride, playing the part he was given. Ultimately, he admitted he wasn't a true hero, which made Ed call out to him direly. But Alexis adds that the one who gets to decide that there's a difference between those who are born great and those who work their butts to become great, that it's those around him who make him special. This much Ed helped him realize. So with that, Ed proclaims that he will surpass the voice's truth and create his own because he's a hero, pulling the sword out as he said so. As he did that, a flash of light beamed, followed by a powerful slash that cut the biggest stone golem in half with a force that pierced through the forest. Alexis stood holding the glowing holy sword, and Tia couldn't help but call it pretty with how it looked as if someone had sharpened the moon itself. Alexis stares at the blade in his hand, marveling at the power of the true holy sword. Clutching it tightly, he proclaims that he could break through the impregnable demon world and reach the demon lord when he caught and corrected himself. With this power and all of them pushing him forward, Alexis truly believed that they could defeat the demon lord. Just like that, Alexis brilliantly took his place as the hero, with the moonlight subtly shining in his eyes as they talked about the technique he just used.
Before the battle with the demon lord, Gonzo told Alexis to get some rest, promising to take over the night watch. Alexis asked about Tia and Ed, and Gonzo explained that they're also exhausted and were already sleeping. Alexis thanked Gonzo for staying by his side for so long. Gonzo looked a little surprised and asked if something was wrong, wondering if Alexis was worried about not making it through the fight with the Demon Lord. Alexis shook his head, saying it wasn't that. He just needed to be prepared because he deserved to live his own life. Gonzo raised an eyebrow and asked if Alexis thought he wasn't ready. Alexis assured him that he was, but there were others who might not be as prepared. With a smirk, Gonzo replied that maybe they couldn't expect the same from Tia and Ed, but he'd protect everyone with his strength. Alexis told Gonzo that if the time ever came, he should forgive him for being selfish. He laughed but then suddenly noticed something and shouted a warning to Gonzo. Gonzo quickly activated his aura shield and asked if Alexis had spotted their target. Ed responded that he hadn't been able to track it because there were too many obstacles in his way. Alexis told him to step back, saying he would handle it by wiping them out with his secret technique. He activated his power, Full Moon Light Sword, and with a flash, created a bubble of light around his weapon before dashing forward. Ed watched, impressed. Meanwhile, Alexis asked Tia if she was ready, and when she confirmed it, he pointed to the tallest tree, indicating where their target was hiding. Tia used her magic Tempest Ray and fired an arrow straight at it. A vast, deep forest separated the human and demon worlds, a forbidden territory filled with dangerous magical beasts. Ed recalled how 10 years ago in the future, his past self had carried Tia through this very place using a forbidden skill. That journey had been an exception. Attempting to cross normally would be nearly impossible without the powers of a hero. Afterward, they sat together around the fire, reflecting that if they'd made it this far, they should be able to handle what was ahead. Tia suggested they needed a break and mentioned how much she missed Ed's home-cooked meals since they've been living off preserved food lately. Ed laughed, promising that when they returned to town, he'd make her the most delicious meal. Gonzo agreed, saying a good meal alone was enough to keep him going. Then they turned to Alexis, asking if he was alright after using such a powerful move. He assured them that he was fine, but admitted that he still wasn't very good at controlling it yet. He promised he'd get better soon. After all, he was a hero. Tia noted how she thought it would take them years to challenge the Demon Lord, yet it only had been 6 months since they met Ed, and now they've come this far. Gonzo agreed while Ed grew quiet, reflecting on those 6 months. He remembered one of the conditions to return to the White World was being part of a hero party for more than 6 months, which he had already fulfilled. The next step would be his exile. As he was lost in thought, Gonzo commented that a single day spent together was worth more than a decade. Ed looked at Alexis, who now wielded his true holy sword, making him the strongest person in the world. Together with Tia and Gonzo, they made the best hero party, but Ed couldn't help but wonder about his own place in it all. Ed thought to himself that even though they were fighting together, his goal was different from theirs. He suspected they all wanted to stay in this world while he longed to return home. Sometimes he wondered if he could keep living there, but deep down, after all he had seen, his heart still yearned for more. Feeling sad, he watched Gonzo and Tia cheering with water, excited and ready to face the Demon Lord. Suddenly, he asked everyone what their plans were after defeating the Demon Lord. They were surprised by the question, but then Tia smiled and asked if Alexis would become a king. They all laughed at the thought. Alexis then turned to Gonzo, asking if he would return to the Eastern Kingdom. Gonzo nodded, saying he couldn't just vanish without reporting back, but promised he'd come back to visit soon. When Alexis asked Tia about her plans, she looked thoughtful, then said she'd love to travel the world. She explained her excitement and suggested they could all meet up to share stories of their journeys. Alexis and Gonzo smiled, happy to hear her answer. Meanwhile, Ed stayed silent, listening seriously to everyone's responses, still thinking about his own path. Tia then asked Ed about his plans. Taking a deep breath, he said he'd return to his hometown, bringing back some souvenirs. He smiled and mentioned it was a peaceful rural village. Hearing this, everyone was excited to learn more. Tia asked him to share his contact information, saying she didn't want him to just disappear. Gonzo agreed, adding that even if the party disbanded, they were comrades who had fought together and that their bond would always remain. Seeing Gonzo's conviction, Alexis joked that maybe he was getting drunk on water. Just then, with a serious expression, Ed looked at Alexis and asked him to make sure that he defeated the Demon Lord. Alexis firmly replied that he intended to keep his promise. Ed extended his fist and asked Alexis to promise with him to defeat the Demon Lord no matter what it took. Alexis was a bit surprised, but then returned the fist bump, promising that he would absolutely defeat the Demon Lord. This was the first of what Ed felt would be 100 goodbyes, knowing he wouldn't see the journey through the end. While everyone rested in their tents, he kept watch, thinking he wanted to give everything he had so he'd have no regrets. Suddenly, Gonzo woke up and stepped outside, telling Ed he could rest now as he'd take over the watch. Ed asked about Tia, and Gonzo replied she was sleeping peacefully, wondering if something was wrong. Ed hesitated, then asked Gonzo if he'd want him to ask him anything. Gonzo was puzzled by the question, but Ed had already resolved that he wouldn't carry any regrets or let anything hold him back. This was his final task before his exile. Now, in the present, as they ran towards their destination, Gonzo happily pointed out that they'd finally reached the end of the demon world. It had taken them nearly a month, but they were there at last. Alexis announced that he would clear the way and with a single powerful strike, opened a path forward. Watching this, Ed chuckled to himself, thinking that maybe this was why the first hero's party had been wiped out. Ahead of them, the Demon Lord waited, smirking villainously as he welcomed them, surrounded by his monsters, clearly excited for the final showdown. With a smirk, the monster who seemed to be the general taunted Alexis, saying that only a true hero like him could make it through the demon world, but questioned whether he could face this army in his exhausted state. Hearing this, Ed replied, asking if the general wasn't exaggerating a bit. He further said that Alexis would carve everyone's signature neatly into the general's body using his holy sword, inviting anyone interested in a hero's autograph to line up. The general laughed and questioned if this truly was the hero he had heard about. According to his reports, the person who supposedly cornered Cyan, a high-ranking leader, was not a hero, but merely a black-haired baggage carrier. Suddenly, a voice from the general's eye repeated that Alexis was indeed the hero. Shocked, Alexis and the others wondered if such a creature could actually exist. Ed, staying calm, asked the general if he'd let the others go if he stayed behind. The general just laughed, saying that, nonsense. He intended to end them all right there with his full army. Alexis realized they need to defeat the demon forces before advancing and remarked that demons really were foolish, acting so superior while saying pointless things. Enraged, the general shouted that he would kill them and ordered his monsters to attack. As the monsters charged, Alexis prepared his holy sword and turned to Ed, saying, "Let's finish this in the blink of an eye." Ed nodded with a slight smile, but Tia cautioned them not to use too much energy, reminding them that they still had to face the Demon Lord. Gonzo agreed and shouted with determination for them to leave the monsters to him and Tia. With fierce resolve, Gonzo charged forward and Tia used her magic to attack, unleashing powerful spells that wiped out many monsters at once. Chaos erupted around them as the general commanded his monsters to focus on wearing down the hero, using their bodies to drain the group's strength. He was also taken aback by the elf's magic, realizing that no matter what he did, he couldn't match their power. Observing their defense, he muttered in disbelief. It wasn't what he had been told, and their magic showed no signs of fading. Growing anxious, he shouted and ordered the ground beneath them to collapse. Suddenly, the earth began to crack beneath their feet. Shocked, the group wondered if it was a trap, but Tia quickly created a protective bubble around them, cushioning their fall as they descended. Alexis noted that simply falling like this wasn't ideal, and that they needed support to counter it. Just then, Ed glanced down and froze, realizing there was a massive snake waiting below. Ed quickly warned everyone to hold on to something, and Tia used her magic skill, Earthly Arm, to catch them, keeping them from falling into the giant snake's mouth. Gonzo took a stance in front of the monster while the others held on to its massive head. The snake sneered, asking if they thought they could escape, threatening to break through their defenses. Gonzo smirked, remarking that he had never thought something so huge could even fly, then lunged forward to strike the monster. As the snake fixated on him, Ed took his chance, slashing his sword at its head and telling everyone to prepare for a wild and breezy ride. The snake, writhing in pain from Ed's blow, began thrashing about at high speed. Ed called out to Tia to use her wind magic to shield them, explaining that they needed to keep steady or they might all crash. Suddenly, they found themselves hovering above the ground, smoke swirling all around them. Ed wondered if their plan had worked. Tia nodded, saying it was close, but she had managed just in time. He handed her a potion, saying she used a lot of magic, and then tossed one to Gonzo as well. Gonzo smirked, declaring that no amount of damage could weaken his muscles, though Ed insisted he take the potion to restore his magical strength. Just then, Alexis called Ed's attention to their surroundings, pointing out that it looked like they'd arrived, though it didn't quite match what they'd expected. They all stared ahead, realizing they were now standing at the edge of the true demon world. Tia voiced concern, asking if entering directly wasn't too risky. Gonzo replied that they'd just overcome one obstacle, and if they left the demon army behind, they'd risk being attacked from both sides. Tia agreed, acknowledging that they couldn't ignore the danger. At that moment, Alexis asked for their attention. He thanked each of them for staying by his side and explained that the place was a death zone. Unlike him, a hero with a destiny to fulfill, they had their own lives to consider, so he asked if they would still fight by his side until the end. Ed thought Alexis was just acting out of pride and determination, traits that had driven him to support Tia earlier, but now he seemed uncertain, even vulnerable. Tia and Gonzo shared a smile and agreed, saying they would obviously go together. Alexis was visibly moved by the response, but Ed suddenly laughed, admitting that he was relieved they were strong enough to go without him. Then, with a sad expression, he apologized, revealing he wouldn't be joining them. Alexis was completely taken aback. Tia asked if he was joking, but Ed assured her that he was serious and apologized. She was surprised, reminding him that he'd promised to stay with him until the end. But Ed explained that he had been thinking about this for a long time. If he stayed and fought to defeat the Demon Lord with them, he wondered if he would still have a chance to return to his home world. He questioned whether if Alexis lost his role as the hero after the Demon Lord's defeat, would it still fulfill the terms of his exile from the hero's party? Ed realized he wouldn't know until he tried, but if it didn't work, he might never be able to return home. It left him unsure about risking his own life on a gamble, making him feel torn about his decision. He thought once again that he was choosing to leave in the middle of their journey. Then Alexis spoke up, acknowledging that it was a difficult choice to make at such a crucial time. He said that as a hero, they seem weak compared to him, but he understood that for an ordinary person like Ed, it was still a matter of life and death. Tia was shocked to hear Alexis say that, but he continued, explaining that this was truly what Ed wanted, to go back home, so he had made the right decision. Alexis told Ed he respected his choice, and that this was where they would say their farewells. Alexis thanked Ed for the Holy Sword, saying it would help him easily cut through their weaker forces. He then told Ed to go on, to teleport away just before the battle starts. Tia turned to Gonzo and asked if he was okay with Ed's decision. This made Gonzo recall the conversation he had spent with Ed outside the tent, where Ed mentioned how strong the three of them had become and how he felt sorry for the Demon Lord for what was coming. Gonzo reminded him that it wasn't just the three of them, it was the four of them together that made them the hero's party. During that conversation, Ed had asked Gonzo for a favor. Gonzo had been curious, and Ed had explained that once they broke through the demon world, a massive army was waiting to ambush them. Gonzo, confident, thought if it was the same kind of army as before, they could take them down. But Ed warned this time the army was much larger and stronger. Gonzo had seen it as a chance to weaken their numbers before the final showdown. As Ed walked away, he mentioned that they had barely rested and had been fighting non-stop for days. Gonzo agreed that it was impossible to stay in top form under those conditions, even though they kept winning. Ed pointed out that they were all starting to feel the strain, and he asked Gonzo if they really believed they could defeat the Demon Lord in such an exhausted state. Above all, Ed wanted to make sure Alexis could reach the Demon Lord, and Gonzo shared that goal. Ed had told them that they need to make logical decisions when the time came, and he asked Gonzo that, just like he had always had their backs, if the moment came, Gonzo could have his back too. In the present moment, as Ed handed the heavy bag back to Gonzo, he said it should be no problem for him to carry it. With a serious look, Gonzo asked if this was the moment Ed had spoken about before. Ed nodded, saying that he was counting on him. Gonzo took the bag and told both Alexis and Tia to follow him as they were heading out. Tia hesitated, asking if it was right to go in the opposite direction when the Demon Lord's army was ahead. Ed simply started walking away. Gonzo grabbed Alexis' hand firmly, but Alexis, confused and frustrated, demanded he let go, asking what was happening. Angrily, Alexis told Gonzo that sacrificing a comrade to advance was wrong, but Gonzo cast a magic barrier around them to prevent Alexis from going back. Alexis, still angry, shouted that he would never accept Gonzo's actions. Watching them, Ed smiled to himself, thinking he knew Alexis would react this way. He knew how selfless he was, seeing how he would save Tia first and then himself. Meanwhile, the Demon Lord, intent on crushing Ed, ordered his full army forward. Ed, standing ready, thought that if he could eliminate the army here, Alexis and the others would only have to face the Demon Lord himself. Alexis argued that the Demon Lord was after him specifically, and if that was true, he should be the one to face him. Gonzo, growing frustrated, told Alexis that if he truly was the hero, he needed to understand Ed's resolve. He challenged Alexis, asking what he, as a hero, should be doing right now. Alexis paused, reflecting on past moments when he'd believed he could do more, and perhaps should have. Meanwhile, Tia, saddened, remembered Ed telling her that he didn't want their efforts to go to waste. She wondered if letting him go like this was really the right choice. Alexis looked over at Ed, who watched him with a calm smile. Ed's expression seemed to ask if he would stubbornly let his pride stop him from fulfilling his duty. Then Ed raised his fist, the same way he had when he made Alexis promise to defeat the Demon Lord. Seeing this, Alexis' eyes widened in shock, unable to believe what he was witnessing. Ed turned to Alexis and asked if he would exile him from the party, saying he was running away. Tia shouted that she wouldn't accept this and begged Alexis to stop him. Gonzo held her back, though she struggled to break free. With tears in his eyes, Alexis took a deep breath, then threw his sword toward Ed, officially exiling him from the party. Ed caught the sword and, with a sad smile, told Alexis to make sure he'd come back someday to take it back, calling him his friend. He thanked him, and as he did, the conditions for his return were met. Now, he had only 10 minutes left before he would be sent back to his own world. As he walked away, Ed silently apologized to Tia and entrusted her to Gonzo's care. He thought about how he had once again made them cry. Alexis and Tia stood there, both torn, wondering if they should go with him. Tia remembered being the only survivor of her past, and now that painful feeling has returned, and she couldn't hold back her tears. Gonzo urged them to pull themselves together, saying that they'd only waste Ed's sacrifice if they stayed like this. Tia protested, knowing Gonzo didn't truly want this either, but he reminded her that Ed had entrusted him to see them through this, and he wouldn't let Ed down. As they moved forward, Ed, holding the holy sword, faced the general and his army. The general taunted, remarking that the hero and his party could now advance, but he would crush Ed and catch up to them soon after. Ed grinned and asked the general if he truly believed he had a future. That with fierce determination, Ed charged at the army, declaring that he would bring their end. The monster noticed a sudden shift in Ed's aura when he stood alone in front of the army. He smirked, realizing that Ed truly had some guts. Meanwhile, Tia remembered how Ed would sometimes make certain expressions when they first met. When he was making their weapons, it was as if he was gazing out of a window, watching children play outside. She thought his expression often seemed to say that he was the only one who didn't belong there. Tia desperately wanted to show him that it wasn't true, even if it meant risking her life. Just then, a monster appeared in front of them. The creature, a Grossgear guard, sneered, saying that he didn't expect them to show up, but now that they had, he wouldn't waste the chance to tear them apart. Tia thought to herself that the place Ed longed for was beyond her imagination. If that was the case, she couldn't choose a future where she ignored his wishes and turned back to stop him. She knew she had to keep moving forward. Alexis was ready, but Tia asked Gonzo to let her down, assuring him that she was okay now. Gonzo hesitated, but she insisted, so he let her go. The monster sneered, mocking Alexis for sacrificing one of his weak comrades, calling it a plan fit for a spineless hero like him. However, Tia quickly began casting her magic. She summoned the Stormbringer and infused her silver spirit sword with it. A powerful tornado formed, tearing through the monster in the blink of an eye. Turning to Alexis, Tia said, "Let's go and defeat the Demon Lord." She knew that in order to reach the future Ed had longed for, from the other side of the window, she had to keep moving forward. On the other side, Ed was battling the monsters. The monster, noticing the barrier had been breached, quickly called for reinforcements. He wondered who this man was. Why was he so strong despite not being a hero? Ed was relentlessly cutting down enemies with his sword. He had activated his exiled skill, which boosted all of his abilities 100 times. The intense energy surged through him, causing steam to escape from his body. However, if he kept pushing himself like this, his heart would give out within 10 minutes and he would die. The monster, seeing Ed moving around so much, decided to stop him by disrupting his momentum. He used his power to erase gravity, causing both the monsters and Ed to float in the air. With Ed's movements now hindered, the monster caught him and used his skill Destruction Nova, causing a massive explosion. After the blast, a huge hole formed. The monster laughed loudly, saying it had taken a bit of time to deal with that weakling, but the farce was over now. He ordered Giganoth to chase down the hero, while he would reorganize the troops. However, Giganoth replied that he had lost his authority since the army had fallen, and now he would defeat the hero himself. The monster, furious, reminded Giganoth that their true enemy was the hero, and this wasn't the time for power struggles. They had to prioritize killing the hero once and for all. Suddenly, a bright light appeared in front of them, surrounded by steam. Ed, moving at the speed of light, charged towards Giganoth and drove his sword into him, shouting that they weren't going anywhere. With one powerful strike, he sliced through the middle of Giganoth's body. The monster was shocked to see Ed still alive. He demanded to know how Ed had survived. The monster used his power to erase gravity again, but Ed activated his magic skill, Magic Absorbed, making him invincible to the monster's power. Ed remarked that he was better than them in every way, and that he would soon leave this world. He had been repeating the same things for over 100 years, and no matter who or what he was just an outsider. He attacked the monster, using all of his abilities in unison, dealing huge blows to him. The monster realized he had underestimated Ed and ordered his army to stop him. He now recognized Ed as the biggest threat, but Ed, while continuing to attack, declared that since he was returning alone, he would bring everything with him. He activated his Bloodblade tempering skill, stating that he wouldn't leave a single piece of this world behind. The attacks he made caused devastation, leading to a tragic end for the Demon Lord's forces, leaving the battlefield littered with blood and corpses. Ed stood amidst the carnage, receiving the notification that only 1 minute remained until his return. The monsters looked at Ed in shock, wondering how one man could have such overwhelming strength while monster blood flowed through his body. They questioned what he really was as they watched him regenerate his hands. Ed walked toward them, declaring that it was time to end this. The large monster stepped forward, saying Ed couldn't evade death forever, but Ed swiftly drove his sword through him, killing him instantly. With the monster slain, only the general now stood between him and victory. The general acknowledged Ed's strength, saying he was indeed the mightiest member of the hero's party, and that's why he'd chosen to stay behind. He claimed Ed's arrogance would be his downfall, vowing to prevent him from reuniting with his comrades at any cost. He then activated his ability, Gravity Collapse. In response, Ed laughed, pointing out that strength wasn't his alone. He reminded the general about Gonzo, who always protected them, Alexis, whose courage knew no bounds, and Tia, whose warm smile uplifted everyone's spirits. He said they were all the best and the strongest people he knew. Charging toward the general, Ed declared that they were different from any half-hearted outsider, and it was strength and unity that let them risk everything for this moment. With one decisive strike, Ed drove his sword into the general, but the general only laughed, saying that such power couldn't be used without costing Ed his life. He taunted Ed, saying he'd never see his friends again. Angered, Ed unleashed a powerful blow, slicing through the general and ending him. Ed took a deep breath, feeling the strain even with his boosted recovery abilities. It had been rough, but he smiled, relieved that he'd finally wiped out the last of his enemies and made it in time. Now, he thought, there should be no one left to stand in his friend's way. Everything else was up to Alexis and the others. As he walked, Ed wondered what they would do after this. The world of ruin was no more, and he imagined a bright future ahead for Alexis and Gonzo. Tia, too, wouldn't need to hide away in the forest anymore. He thought about how everyone in that world could finally live in peace. Looking around, he realized that this was his final moment here, and wondered if he truly kept his promise to Tia. Ed considered leaving his weapon behind, so they wouldn't try to find him once he was gone. Just then, he saw a notification flash. 10 seconds remaining until return. Ed thought it would be too sad if they found no trace of him at all, so he decided to leave something behind so they'd understand he met his end there. Looking at his hands, he could feel his strength fading, and he smiled, satisfied that he'd done everything that he wanted in that world. He wished them good luck and sent a quiet farewell to Tia. Then, in a flash, he was transported to a place filled with white light. When he opened his eyes, he realized he'd finally made it back. He was in that dull, familiar place again. Checking himself, he saw that he was back to his old form. Weak body, worn-out sword, everything just as it was before. He wondered if the after effects of his exile skill might have killed him there. With a smile, he walked towards the door. It looked just as he remembered. He figured his friends had likely defeated the Demon Lord by now. Noticing the crystal ball shining again, he thought maybe there was a reward for waiting, even on the second lap. Perhaps this time he'd get a new skill or an upgraded version of one. When he touched the crystal ball, its glow faded, and suddenly a book fell on his head. Frustrated, he grumbled, wondering why it always had to land on his head. This time though, he noticed the book's title, Heroic Record Result Book. Curious, he wondered if this was his reward for clearing the world. Opening the book, he realized it was a biography of Alexis. As he read, he saw details of Alexis's life from his birth, including his environment and even little quirks, like his childhood dislike of tomatoes. Ed found himself smiling, touched by each story that showed what a kind-hearted kid Alexis has been. His fingers lingered on the page where Tia joined their group, and his heart warmed when he finally saw his own name on the text. Smiling, he felt an odd sense of belonging as he read. Then he reached a part that spoke about a fourth friend and comrade, a hero who accompanied Alexis and the others, someone who made it possible for them to even challenge the Demon Lord. It described this friend as the true hero deserving of praise. Realizing it was about him, Ed's eyes filled with tears. Overwhelmed by the recognition, he felt a deep happiness. Noticing an empty shelf nearby, he placed the book there, and it fit perfectly. He stood back, wondering what Alexis, Tia, and Gonzo would do after the Demon Lord's defeat. He imagined Gonzo might have returned to his homeland, but he was especially concerned about Tia. She had often spoken of traveling the world, yet he worried she might be searching for him even now. Looking toward the next door, Ed thought about how his friends had kept their promise. Now it was his turn, and he vowed to create a happy ending in the remaining 99 worlds. Remembering the general's words, "Die alone in solitude," he wondered why it even bothered him. He knew all along that this was the path he'd chosen, a future where he left nothing behind, belonged nowhere, and was simply a passerby. He was willing to forsake everything to one day find his happiness, a way back home. As he was lost in thought, he suddenly heard a voice. Turning around, he saw Tia standing there, tears in her eyes. "I finally found you," she said, as her voice trembled. In Notland, the children were playing together, pretending to be heroes. One boy had taken the role of Ed, but looked unhappy about playing him again. Tia, passing by, noticed and asked why he didn't want to be Ed, reminding him that Ed was known as Alexis' best friend and was really cool. As she continued walking, she thought about how 10 years had passed since they defeated the Demon Lord and Ed disappeared. Life was slowly returning to normal, and Notland, of all places, had become the most peaceful. In the castle, Alexis was speaking with a commoner when his attendant, Reginald, announced the last guest of the day, an elven visitor. The guest greeted Alexis politely, hoping he was doing well. Alexis, however, told her that formalities weren't necessary, adding that a king's time was more valuable than she seemed to think. The guest raised her head, and Alexis immediately recognized her as Tia. Smiling, he stood up just as Tia ran to him, leaping into a hug. She joyfully said it had been 2 years since they last met, and asked if he was well. Gently, he asked her to let go first, then asked if she had traveled by sea this time. Tia nodded, saying it took half the time of the land route. Reginald chuckled, commenting that she was as lively and free-spirited as ever. Smiling, she replied that it was nice to see him too. Alexis reminded her that he still had meetings, but Reginald reassured him that he'd already adjusted the schedule for today. Grateful, Tia thanked him eagerly. They stood on top of the castle, looking out over the city. Alexis remarked that while the capital was thriving, much of the world beyond its borders was still in darkness. His mission, he explained, was to bring light to every distant home. If he couldn't manage that, he wouldn't be honoring the promise he made to Ed. He recalled how after defeating the Demon Lord, they'd rushed back to find Ed, but had only discovered countless monster corpses and Ed's sword. He wanted to return Ed's body to his homeland, but years of searching had only led to rumors that Ed might still be alive somewhere. After 10 years, Alexis gently suggested that it might be time to face reality, adding that Ed would likely want her to move forward. Tia was quiet for a moment, then asked if he remembered the reason she traveled to the Eastern lands. Alexis recalled it was to study a technique for sensing souls. Smiling, she revealed that she had succeeded. He was taken aback by the news. Tia explained that with some help from Gonzo, she had finally learned where Ed's soul was, though she didn't yet know how to reach him. He wondered what she meant by that, and she explained that Ed's presence seemed too distant, possibly across the sea, high above the sky, or even beyond the boundaries of their world. Alexis was stunned, but she continued, saying she was considering a special spell that could reach any destination, no matter the distance. He asked if she meant teleportation magic, but he reminded her he thought it wasn't feasible. She asked if he thought that because it required a massive amount of mana. He agreed, and she confirmed that even with her elven abilities, she probably didn't have enough. Alexis suggested that she might need to gather mana from around the world and that there could be volunteers willing to help with such a noble cause. However, he also warned her of the dangers of teleporting to an unknown location, saying they'd need to plan carefully. Tia thanked him, but said this was her personal, heartfelt wish and that she wanted to do it on her own. She added that Ed would be upset if she caused trouble for others. Though Alexis looked concerned, she reassured him with a smile, reminding him that she was part of the strongest group of heroes who would save the world. She'd be fine. Later that night, Alexis was in his library. Reginald reminded him that it was time to rest, but Alexis replied that he'd get some sleep as soon as he finished his work. Reginald then asked if he wanted to have dinner with Lady Tia, but Alexis explained that that wasn't necessary. She had finally found a lead on Ed, and he didn't want to interrupt her. Reginald asked where Tia was, and Alexis replied that she was in the archives, completely absorbed in her research. In the meantime, he wanted to do everything he could to help. Reginald expressed concern, wondering if they were pushing themselves too hard and hoping they wouldn't damage their health. Alexis laughed and reassured him, smiling as he said they had finally found a trace of their dear friend. There's no way he would let that slip away now. Meanwhile, in the archives, a young assistant named Lynn brought Tia some newly published research papers. Tia thanked her, apologizing for making her carry so many documents. Lynn assured her that it was no trouble. She'd be happy to do it all day. Grateful, Tia reflected on Alexis' kindness in granting her access to the National Archives. Now she could read nearly every research paper, even secret documents she'd normally never see. She felt incredibly lucky to have such supportive friends. Determined, she resolved that no matter how long it took, even if it required her whole life, she would find Ed. As she read, she noted that the silver-winged sword Ed left behind was still stored in the kingdom's treasury. She finally confirmed Ed's location using one of the sword's wings, realizing that he was impossibly far away. Growing tired, she wondered why he had gone so far. Just as she was about to fall asleep, a book caught her eye. She picked it up curiously and saw that the author's name was Rouge. Happily heading towards the castle, Tia was greeted by Reginald, who noticed her high spirits and asked if something exciting had happened. She chuckled, asking if it really showed that much. Unable to contain her enthusiasm, she rushed inside, bursting with excitement, and announced that she'd discovered something incredible, only to realize that Alexis was in the middle of a meeting. Embarrassed, she quickly apologized and slipped back outside. Alexis stifled a laugh while others in the room commented on her boundless energy. They remarked that her cheerful presence brought a smile to their faces and wondered if she made an important discovery. Alexis announced a short recess and then stepped outside to find Tia, who looked a bit embarrassed. He noted she seemed even more restless than usual and asked what was on her mind. She apologized for interrupting his meeting, then eagerly showed him the book she'd found, marveling at the author's insight and wondering what kind of person they were. Alexis read the author's name and agreed the person was certainly talented. She asked to borrow the article, noticing he was wearing armor, and curiously asked about it. He explained that he was headed to inspect the dangerous area and reassured her that she could keep the article, as the original was safely stored. When he asked about her discovery, Tia lit up, explaining that if she applied the theory in this article, a method she'd almost given up on might actually work. Then she stopped, saying it was a secret for now, but promised to share it if things went well. He smiled, saying he was looking forward to it, and she told him to count on her. She'd make the experiment a success. Thanking him for the article, she wished him luck with his own work and dashed off energetically, determined to give it her best. An old man was approached and asked if he had a moment. The old man looked up and noticed that it was Miss Tia, curious about what was going on. She told him excitedly that she had discovered a shortcut. Though it was only theoretical, if she could make it work, it would allow her to transcend this world and reach Ed. However, she explained it needed to be tested in a place filled with atmospheric mana, like the demon world. With determination, she mounted her eagle and headed towards the demon world. She thought about how Alexis and Gonzo were both fulfilling their destinies in their own ways, which was why she couldn't burden them with this task. This was something she had to do alone. Reflecting on all she had done in the past decade, she admitted to herself that she wasn't sure if her plan would succeed. Yet even after everything, Ed was still in her heart, and this time, she truly wanted to make it happen. She arrived in the demon world and settled by a lake, beginning the process of gathering mana. The air was rich with energy, but as she channeled it, she felt her consciousness slipping in and out, exhausted by the effort. Suddenly, a bear appeared nearby. She quickly dispatched it, but the battle drained her even further. As she resumed her spell near the lake, she felt the mana intensifying around her. Her vision blurred as she fought to stay focused. Then all at once, the area around the lake fell silent, with no signs of life nearby. Meanwhile, Gonzo had finally arrived in Notland, where Alexis came to meet him. They greeted each other warmly after 4 years and walked towards the castle, catching up. Gonzo mentioned he had brought some of the finest battle monks from the eastern continent. Alexis thanked him and said that if they could purify the miasma in the area, it would be the first step toward formally establishing a teleportation gate. Gonzo was surprised, admitting he hadn't expected such technology to become a reality in his lifetime. Alexis explained that it was thanks to Tia, who had discovered and revised the research to make it possible. Hearing about Tia, Gonzo asked where she was as they reached the castle. Alexis said she had rushed off again, claiming to have found a lead on Ed. Gonzo asked if she had visited Alexis before leaving, and Alexis nodded, mentioning he had given her some advice. Alexis then remarked that he wished he could rely on them a bit more. He knew they had responsibilities that prevented them from moving as freely as she could, but she didn't need to carry the burden alone. Gonzo laughed, telling Alexis that he was mistaken. Tia was in fact in the same situation as them. She was fulfilling her role, just as they were fulfilling theirs, and her dedication to finding Ed was simply part of her own destiny. He added that supporting her didn't always mean stepping in directly. Alexis agreed, realizing he still had much to learn. Gonzo laughed and asked if Tia was in some laboratory. Alexis remarked that as soon as Tia arrived, she mentioned some research and ran off again. He remarked that whenever she had a new idea, she couldn't sit still. Gonzo chuckled, noting how Tia hadn't changed at all over the years. Suddenly, a young woman approached, asking if they'd happened to be talking about her. Alexis responded that it was perfect timing. They were indeed discussing her thesis, and wanted to ask her some questions. The woman was Rouge, the author of the article Tia had taken. Gonzo greeted her, saying she looked well, and she returned his greeting. Alexis mentioned they were curious about Tia's intentions now that she had access to Rouge's thesis. Rouge agreed to explain, but only if Alexis doubled her research budget. Annoyed, Alexis demanded she just tell them already, while Rouge retorted that he should be more polite when asking for favors. As they began arguing, Gonzo stepped in, saying it was enough, and asked Rouge to explain the thesis. Rouge began explaining that the main focus of her research was the use of external mana. In simple terms, she said it was about learning to harness the mana in the environment as if it were their own. She explained that up until now, multiple mages had to work together to perform large-scale spells, but with this new method, a single person could theoretically achieve the same effect. All they needed was a spell circle, and anyone who could activate the spell could use it, making something like a teleportation gate possible. She asked if they understood the significance of this discovery, as it could advance their world's magic technology by hundreds of years. Both Alexis and Gonzo remarked that it sounded incredible, and asked if the strength of external mana varied depending on their location. Rouge nodded, explaining that a place with rich mana would indeed be more effective. When Alexis asked where such a place might be, she admitted she had ruled out one area because its mana was overly abundant. However, if they focused purely on maximum efficiency, there was one place where monsters had lived for centuries. Hearing this, both their eyes widened as they looked at each other, realizing the place she meant was the demon world.